Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. And we in the calm before the Russian storm, and everybody's life in danger. Russia has started retaliating, but just a little bit. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Let's get into the content. It don't look too good for Zelensky. I think some NATO officers died today, too.
Russian Iskander missile continue to work, making another visit to the Novomoskovsk military training center, inflicting severe damage that has crippled Ukrainian reserves and morale. Video shows the early morning attack on June 1, 2025, the Iskander precision strike with its cluster munitions, wiping out the tent camps of the 158th Separate Mechanized Brigade and the 33rd Separate Mechanized Brigade, with a notorious ballistic missile falling on the large Ukrainian training ground located in Gvardiskoy settlement, Dnipropetrovsk region, about 130 kilometers from the front line. The Russian Defense Ministry released images on June 2nd, showing the impact and damage caused by one missile, at least 5 tents containing personnel destroyed, and a fire at an ammunition.
NATO officers, the head of Ukraine's ground forces, he resigned after this. Probably working with Russia. A lot of NATO died hiding out. Thought they was hiding out somewhere. They got paid a visit by the Icelander missile. That's a hypersonic multi-million-dollar missile. So they ain't wasting it on a bunch of nobodies.
Ammunition storage area with smoke billowing following Iskander's work. The department did not provide a death toll, but the evidence strongly suggests that personnel were killed en masse in the attack, which has widened Ukrainian leadership crisis and deepened NATO's humiliation. However, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry claims, only admitting that 12 people were killed and 69 more were injured, but the number is multiples, possibly closer to 100. Ukraine again claims that there was no formation or mass gathering of personnel, because after the air raid siren sounded, most personnel were in shelters. There was no immediate confirmation from Russia, which may reflect a different narrative on the attack, but one source suggested the casualties were much higher than 75. This led to Ukrainian Army Commander Mikhailo Drapety to announce his early resignation as a result of Russian Iskander. Apparently, Iskander divided the command, further widening Kiev NATO leadership crisis, which is experiencing a personnel crunch of hundreds of people every day in order to continue the war.
So this was a very deadly strike. So whatever these commanders, and this wasn't just local jokers. This was NATO training Ukraine's leaders to go carry out ground missions. So just think of a bunch of NATO officers in there. So we're gonna hear about, we know training exercises. We're gonna hear about some U.S. soldiers dying in training exercises. That's coming up. British, German, French, all that in their different countries. They didn't die training. They died here trying to train the Ukrainians and command them to do some violence to Russia. And you know, it's gonna be a lot more of this going on soon. But we do got more information on exactly what took place in the overnight attack, the attack on Russia. We also know that Russia has been threatening these people at the UN Security Council. So see, they always do that. They go to UN Security Council and let them know it's going to be a bunch of violence. They don't want to hear nobody crying or whining when it happened and putting Ukraine on notice. But the U.S. made a terrible mistake, because now one thing we finding out, I was wondering that myself, why the hell did Russia have these bombers just sitting sitting on these airfields like this. This is the nefarious nature of the U.S. It's a START treaty, and in the treaty, the U.S. and Russia, you have to have your strategic nuclear bombers out in the open, can't be hidden, can't be underground, so that satellites can always see them. So Russia, okay, you sign this treaty, we'll know what you're trying to do with those bombers. Are you trying to bomb the U.S. or U.S. trying to bomb Russia? So now Putin has the right, because of what Zelensky did, to say we're going to pull out of that treaty and we're going to hide our bombers, even though they don't need those bombers that blew up. They have over 200. But that's how nefarious. That's how you know NATO did it, because only NATO knew those bombers couldn't be moved, because that would have violated the treaty. You see, they told Zelensky them how to do it, when to do it, why to do it, to humiliate Russia.
We're going to run that clip now. Chris, cut number 1.
Far from Ukraine's borders, an attack of astonishing audacity. Russian strategic bombers picked off one by one by a fleet of drones. Ukraine calling this Operation Spider's Web, personally overseen by President Zelensky. One of Kiev's boldest attacks so far, a reminder, despite Russia's overwhelming strength in numbers, that Ukraine is a resourceful, determined enemy. Sources say this took a year and a half to prepare. Dozens of drones smuggled into Russia, stored on wooden pallets, loaded onto trucks, driven to distant air bases, and launched remotely. Swarms of drones picked up on social media from Siberia to the Arctic Circle. At a petrol station north of Irkutsk, a glimpse of the operation in progress. With smoke already rising behind, a drone emerges from the truck and heads off to join the attack. Moments later, another.
Now,
and
they call it this Russia's Pearl Harbor. That I wouldn't be calling it Russia's Pearl Harbor if I was you. You know, some Russians are saying it. If I was the Russians, I would be saying it. If I was Russian, I'd be saying, yes, this is our Pearl Harbor. And what happened to Japan after they attacked Pearl Harbor? Well, the story goes, they got nuked.
Gunfire as police officers try to bring it down. Ukraine claims to have done a staggering $7 billion worth of damage and knocked out a third of the planes Russia uses to deliver cruise missiles.
Lies.
Ми розуміємо, з ким маємо справу.
We know exactly whom we are dealing with. We will defend ourselves by every means available to us, available to Ukraine, available to Ukrainians. Not for a single moment did we want this war.
But this is very dangerous. Why would Ukraine what would Ukraine give a damn about Russia's strategic nuclear bombers and strategic bombers? Even though Russia do use some of these to launch cruise missiles. No, NATO cares about these. Only NATO, especially the U.S., care about these bombers being blew up. It doesn't help Ukraine not one bit, but it don't help NATO neither, because Russia don't need these fucking bombers. They got dozens more. They got 200 more. But the submarines is all they need to wipe out. And they can wipe out NATO and America, you know, without any bombers at all. The submarines is what, yeah, it's really got
the Russians a ceasefire.
Earlier, a different kind of wreckage. This, the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia, after the country suffered another major drone and missile attack. Elsewhere, 12 Ukrainian soldiers were killed at a training base, the head of Ukraine's land forces tendering his resignation. What chance then for another round of peace talks set to take place in Istanbul? Russian and Ukrainian delegations are expected to be there, but after 24 hours of mayhem, the omens for a breakthrough do not seem good.
How do you interpret all this, Alistair?
Just the usual BBC propaganda straight out of Ukraine. You know, there are bits of it that are vaguely correct, but it's just typical of the BBC. They're not reliable sources of news on Ukraine at all, I'm afraid. And this was the case. Yes, it was an extraordinary event. They had these trucks fitted with retractable roofs, and the drones had been manufactured and put within them, and that at a certain point they were placed very close. They were driven across by unsuspecting Russian drivers who didn't realize what they were doing in many cases, driven across, placed near to airports, and then the roof automatically retracted. They were using the Russian telecom system in order to have, if you like, a simultaneous retraction of the roof in 5 and next to 5 air bases in Russia. And then the drones flew and attacked or attempted to attack, because only 2 of them actually functioned. There seems to have been a malfunction in the retractable roof in several occasions, and in other occasions, the Russian defense systems took down the drones before they did damage. But in 3 areas, now there's no absolute confirmation about how much damage there has been done, but it looks like that there were overall about 5 strategic Tu-95 bombers who were damaged, 2 possibly destroyed, 3 damaged heavily but maybe recovered, a transport plane, and 1 other plane, which the Ukrainians have said was an AWAC plane, an A-50, but there's absolutely no evidence at all. So we're talking about the loss of about 5, maybe more in these areas, and it was right across Russia, the bases, as that documentary suggested, far away. But these had all been pre-positioned, and these were locally fired killer drones fired out of the back of a truck. And 5, probably 5. Now, Russia altogether doesn't produce these Tu-95s anymore, but they still estimated to have 45 to 55 of these in service. So it's not going to change the course of this history, not going to stop. In that big bombing raid, the Trump miscast and saying it was, they were just attacking for no reason, but which followed a similar failed drone attack on Moscow, which did actually close down the 4 Russian airports at the time. But it's not going to change it. It's not a threat to Russia's strategic nuclear capabilities.
Is it?
It's strategic, but there is one thing that is very important to understand, because I've seen a lot of comments saying, but the Russians had all their planes out in the open and they were lined up on the tarmac, and silly Russians. Actually, this is the requirement of the START and SALT nuclear treaties, that the strategic bombers have to be observable by visual and electronic means and out in the open. And the same applies, by the way, to American strategic bombers. They are also put out in the opening. But what this is we're entering a new era of war, because this is somewhat like what we saw with the attack on Hezbollah, using pagers that so damaged, and after which you can't really trust. Are you sure your telephone is safe any longer? And what we are seeing here is several types of what the Ukrainians called asymmetric warfare, but others would call terrorist warfare. There was just recently an assassination of a Russian general. A Russian who was unaware of it came up to him, and he'd been given a package for the general, and it was a bomb, and blew them both up and killed the general. Then we had the bridges, which were destroyed at the edge of Bryansk region of Russia, and deliberately blown up so that they fell onto civilian trains, 2 trains with many injured, many injured, and some deaths that was traveling to Moscow. And now we've had this. But this is really important because, in a sense, this is the strategic nuclear. We're getting to the heart of the thing. Ukraine, supported by its allies in the West, has now bombed directly a part of the strategic deterrence, which has got to be visible and out in the open under the treaties. So it's an attack on the main treaties, which are not with Ukraine, but were negotiated by Russia with the United States. And of course, the big question is that in the last few days, when Mr. Trump started talking about, look, if Russia doesn't do what I'm telling them, something really, really bad is going to happen to them. And then shortly after that, this happened. And I think the Russians are furious at this. They're furious in many ways. But think what that means more widely for all of us. Are we going to have to search every container coming into our countries in case it has a retractable roof and drones, easy to manufacture? The parts are available. You can buy them off the shelf. You put them in, and then by remote control, someone fires it at the nuclear strategic deterrent of Russia or the United States or in the other countries. I mean, this is a new form of strategic war, which is highly dangerous for the future.
The Western media this morning is reporting the loss of about $7 billion in Russian aircraft. Is that a number you question?
Oh, totally. That implies that they destroyed 41 of these Tupolev 95 nuclear capable bombers. It's nonsense. There were only a handful or total. We don't know the exact number because the Russian Defense Ministry hasn't said very clearly. But what we see, I mean, the satellite photography, and we can see roughly what's happened at the various, as I say, for 3 of the areas, there was a malfunction or it didn't happen. And that these figures of billions of losses, 1/3 of their strategic bombing capabilities has gone. But the question is, who's behind it? Was Trump informed? Did he have foreknowledge? Clearly, we've been told by the New York Times 2 months ago that the CIA are in charge, along with their allies in Britain and Israel, in charge of the intelligence for attacking deep into Russia.
Well,
did Trump know? If not, why not? And what does that mean for the talks now?
I mean, you're familiar with international use of intel. Is it even conceivable that something of this magnitude could have been orchestrated without the involvement, not just the knowledge, but the involvement of MI6 and CIA? I'll ask you about Mossad in a minute. I don't know what Mossad would be doing.
Exactly.
Certainly MI6 and CIA, no?
Absolutely. Of course it was. I mean, first there was a huge investment in these drones, building them, preparing and training people, then positioning all of these containers, passing them through into Russia and to trucks with these retractable roofs, making sure that they all work, getting into position. I mean, it was a very sophisticated operation. I admit that quite freely, but I don't think this was done just by Ukraine alone. That sort of operation has the sort of, I'm not saying there's any evidence for it, but I think it has the hallmarks of a Mossad operation. I think the train operation has the hallmarks, at least these were the operations at which Britain was so specialized during the last war in attacking the Germans during the occupation of France. OSS specialized in blowing up tracks and trains carrying civilians during the German occupation of France. I don't know who was involved, but certainly the CIA was at the apex of this cartel of intelligence services.
Why would Mossad be involved? Doesn't Mossad have enough to do with what's going on in the Middle East and with all their spying over here in the U.S.?
There's been there's a long history going back to the Tsarist period of antagonism for supposed anti-Semitism in Russia. And we saw that with the Trotskyists in the United States, who formed the backbone of the neocon movement in the U.S. They have also.
We know the Khazars hate the Russians. We know the real story. Excuse me.
A common alignment with the deep state and its objectives of destroying Russia, because they want to see American hegemony continue because Israel depends on American hegemony. And if Trump is going to disrupt it by having a relationship with Russia, which is going to change many, many things, that is going to affect, ultimately is going to affect Israel, because it is America that is, if you like, the backstop, the hegemony under which the mini hegemony of Israel can extend across the Middle East.
What do you expect will be the retaliation? You said the Russians are furious. Is this enough to cause President Putin to reach the limits of his patience?
You know, I mean, of course, I don't know, because this is what's being discussed at this very moment, I think, in Russia. But I think, yes, you know, Putin has many things to calculate, but the country as a whole, I mean, the feeling is enough's enough. We need to get rid of this problem. And by that, I don't mean a political solution, but I mean a military solution. We need to finish this once and for all. So there's a lot of pressure and a lot of feeling of that sort. So if anyone in America had the imaginings of Zelensky that, you know, by doing this sort of operation, it was going to make Putin more liable, more flexible in the talks today, I think they, you know, they're having a daydream. I don't know what they're smoking, because that's not likely at all. I do think that, I don't know if it's happening, I can't tell you, but I do think that Russia will nonetheless go ahead and present its probably quite tough terms, maybe even tougher today than yesterday, to the Ukrainians. The previous terms have already been refused by Russia because they're just the same terms that Kellogg drafted, and asked, if you like, Witkoff to go and deliver them personally to Mr. Putin. And the Russians said, no, thank you, we don't need those terms. We've already rejected them.
If President Trump did not know about this, there's a very, very serious issue, I would think, in the command structure of the United States government. And if he did know about this, let's assume he did, how is President Putin going to be able to trust anything he says? While
they'll never trust him again,
Right.
if that is the case. Never trust him again. But also, you know, we live in an interconnected world. What do you think the impact is on Iran? And Iran can see, you know, what was being used, and they can suggest, see, you know, when all of these threats are being made to Iran, the use of drones and through the port. You remember a port just suddenly accidentally caught fire in Iran, destroying a lot of the port infrastructure. I mean, they can put two and two together and say, okay, now we see what's coming. This is, you know, we can't trust the United States or the West or Israel on this issue. I mean, it sends a very clear message. I mean, I think Mr. Trump will, at least privately to Mr. Putin, I don't know when they're going to meet, he'll have to explain what happened. I mean, because this is so serious. I mean, this puts the whole START and the SALT treaties into question. I mean, they are obliged to have them open and observable. And if what happens is the CIA then plans in coordination with the Ukrainian intelligence services to destroy them when they're out in the open, as required by the SALT treaties, I mean, there's going to have to be a really tough discussion, I think, there between Putin, Mr. Putin, and Mr. Trump, and saying, well, where does this leave us? You said you wanted to deal with a nuclear issue, and instead of which your people, if it's not you, or if you did know, can we have an explanation for why you did this? Now, if there was a thought that, you know, this was going to put pressure on Putin and Russia, you know, this is actually so miscalculated as to be, I mean, this is such a dangerous move. Now, I don't think, since you asked me, I don't think Putin is going to overreact. I think there will be a reaction, but I don't think, I mean, he knows it's a provocation from those elements, and maybe he calculates, that this is a provocation against those elements within America who may not have told Trump what was coming, other than in the gentlest way, and said, something bad is going to happen to Russia, but didn't spell it out, and didn't spell out the fact that it undermined the whole nuclear agreements between Russia and the United States. I don't know, but I think Russia will take that as a possibility. And therefore, there will be conversations going on, even now, I suspect, as the talks progress. But does it make it, the likelihood of a political outcome to these talks, I think the talks will continue. I don't think there's going to be a political outcome. I think there's escalation coming.
I would imagine that the meeting in Istanbul, which was scheduled to start today, it's 8:30 in the morning in New York. It's about 3:30 or 4:30 in the afternoon in Istanbul, would have been either acrimonious or fruitless at this point.
I think that's exactly what we may find. I don't know, what their tactics are, but certainly I think the Russians will present to Ukrainians terms which the Ukrainians then will say are unacceptable, and they will try and then mount pressure from Europe and into America to counter the Russian proposals. So, we may be in for a long haul, but meanwhile, the Russian forces are advancing very rapidly on the ground, in Sumy particularly. And the Ukrainians are just evacuating something like 100, 200 villages at a go in Sumy. It looks like, at least in Sumy, there's the beginnings of a sort of Ukrainian military collapse. So I think there's no doubt that Russia will increase the pressure on the Ukrainians during this time and push towards a collapse of their military. This has always been the objective, is to actually push it to the point where Ukraine can no longer fight.
The media before we go, the media in the West this morning, the mainstream media, is calling this Russia's Pearl Harbor or Russia's 9/11. I gather you would think that those are gross exaggerations and not apt comparisons.
No, but yeah, what they keep saying it, they need to understand what happened after Pearl Harbor. The U.S. nuked Japan. What happened after 9/11? The U.S. terrorized the Middle East. So if you're saying, comparing those situations to what happened in Russia, all hell finna break loose is what they want, and they saying it's gonna happen.
Look, it's clearly a humiliation for Russia in the sense, and an intelligence failure that these containers come in this way. But I just want to leave you with the thought, we've had the pager incident that came out that, how do you trust your cell phone? And you sure the cell phone isn't going to explode and blow your head off? And now every container is going to have to be checked and monitored. Does it have a sort of self-igniting drone in it? Imagine what that's going to do to our supply lines. We're all going to have to be very, very careful. We're going to know. If Ukraine can do that, who else can do it? Why not do it in America? Why not do it in Iran? These are cheap, relatively cheap products, drones. You can assemble them quite easily. Get a truck to drive in, remove the roof, let it fly, knock out something, assassinate someone. This is a war that is really not only immoral, but it is extraordinarily dangerous, this type of what they, loosely, euphemistically call an asymmetric war. It's nothing of the sort. It's a terrorist war.
Alistair Crook, thank you very much. Thank you for your very, very
you say to people who say Putin is being manipulated and managed? And by the way, I'm one of those people. I'm not going to take this. Sometimes the media say, what do you say about people? I'm one of those people. I know that the belief is that, well, if we pretend that we go through this pantomime of negotiations, that we may be able to get something out of it. And look, I agree, right? So I'm not against them going through the motions of negotiations. By the same token, though, those people who are screaming, Trump should pick up the phone and call Putin, part of my issue and my anger with that is, dude, Trump is a belligerent in this conflict. And for all of this pretending that they're in talks, Putin is moderating what is taking place on the battlefield to try to get better headlines, or at the very least to try to manipulate Trump. And by definition, on some level, that's a manipulation of Putin himself. Donald Trump is a belligerent. So trying to get him on your side seems like a fool's errand when he's a belligerent and party to the conflict. Like, what do you say to people who say, well, Putin is not manipulating Trump, it's the other way around. Putin is limiting, restraining himself under this model of trying to get, I don't know, Trump on his side. And by the way, you can see it for RT. Like, just the language that they use, the acting as if Trump is being managed, or Trump is not being given the information, Trump is not being given the data. Even Russian officials have said this nonsense, as if there's some daylight, there's some separation between what is happening on the battlefield in regards to what Ukraine is doing versus Trump's knowledge of those events. Give me a take on that.
Yeah, so first of all, RT is not like some Chinese English language newspapers, right? What comes out of RT, it would shock people to discover how little it is from the Russian government. Right?
Fair enough.
I mean, obviously there are links, there are interests, but having been, while not an RT employee, about as close as it's possible to be for many years without, I mean, there's
the separation. And I know
very little to none.
Yeah.
Often it would be like, well, how do we run this story? If only we had some word from on high about how we should, but there isn't, right?
Fair enough.
Really a problem. So there obviously is a commonality of interest, but there's remarkably little to none direct messaging from the Russian government in that regard. So when you say some people are manipulating, some people believe some people are manipulating Putin, who are those people that are manipulating Putin?
What I mean by that is the very act of trying to negotiate with Donald Trump and trying to seem amenable and reasonable and trying to say, okay, we'll have this 30-day this ceasefire against energy grids. Okay, well, basically he is limiting, or it comes across as if he's limiting the activity and restraining, let's say, the Russian military and himself and their objectives under this model of trying to get Donald Trump to believe that he is more amenable as opposed to Zelensky. I mean, you've made this argument that part of the reason that he's doing that and they're going through this pantomime of peace negotiations because all things being equal, they want Trump to believe that Ukraine is the one that is not interested in negotiations. I guess I'm saying, isn't that a fool's errand? Donald Trump is A, the main actor that is keeping this conflict going, and B, is part of the country that was the instigator to the conflict in the first place.
So all sides of it, I mean, whether we're talking, the Kremlin, Putin, and, other Russian officials, whether we're talking the White House, whether we're talking, the European political elites, the EU technocracy, the individual state leaders, whether we're talking Zelensky and the Kiev regime, everyone is trying to manipulate each other. I mean, there's no question about that. That's the constant game. I would venture to say that if Trump is trying to manipulate, and people in the U.S. are trying to manipulate Putin in the Kremlin, and Putin and the Kremlin are trying to manipulate Trump and his people around him, I would venture to say that I'm a lot more confident in Putin's ability to manipulate Trump than the other way around, without saying that it's not a part of the game, right? Both sides trying to manipulate each other. But I would venture to think that Putin is pretty intelligent extremely, to the point of insanity, well informed, and very capable and strong-willed in his motivations and intentions.
Let me ask you this way then. Let me ask you this way. Is Putin limiting?
I don't think Trump is any of those things, by the way.
No, he's not. He's incompetent. He's deeply incompetent. But is Putin limiting his activities with the idea of to give this idea that he is trying to negotiate?
So what do you think Russia would do that they're not doing now because they are simultaneously involved in this dance? Is there something that Russia would be doing? You know, is there some connection? Like, because I'm not so sure that there's something that Russia would be doing on the battlefield, separate, you know, that they would not be doing, or they should be doing if they weren't involved in these negotiations. I'm not so sure that's necessarily true. You could argue that you know, the Russian government should be pounding all of Ukraine with Oreshniks and killing the Ukrainian leadership, but I think they have a pretty strong battle plan, and I don't necessarily think that is the reason why Russia limits itself. I think there are limits of a calculated game, either correctly or incorrectly, on deterring NATO from intervening directly in the conflict openly, right? Becoming an open NATO-Russia war, which I think the Kremlin does seek to avoid. And as always, you know, the Russian government is, you know, despite all the propaganda in the Western mainstream media to the contrary, far more concerned about limiting Russian military casualties than the Kiev regime or the West is interested in limiting casualties among the Kiev regime's forces and forced conscripts and the like. I mean, what was that phrase that was it Mark Milley? It was the Pentagon used to criticize the Kiev regime during the NATO planned and failed summer 2023 offensive in the south, too casualty averse. I mean, that was that was the word out of the U.S. military, right? You know, you're not too willing to get enough of your people killed to, you know, achieve the objectives we think you should be able to achieve, right? So I think the exact opposite is true, right? I mean, Russia wants to win this, and they are willing to, you know, put their people at risk, but not unnecessary risk, not when things might be done a little bit slower, but with much greater loss of life and much, at least the calculation, less risk of overt escalation to World War III. At the same time, part of this diplomatic dance is not directed against Trump or the West at all. Some of it is directed against Russian allies in BRICS and in, you know, the global China. South, if you will, to show that yes, we are and always have been the reasonable people, you know, and we are willing to pursue, you know, at least the option of achieving our goals diplomatically, even, you know, if the chances of it are not very high. They're maintaining, shall we say, the diplomatic high ground. But I'm not so sure that necessarily means they're sacrificing things on the battlefield because of some type of restraint because of that. I'm not so, maybe, right? But I haven't seen any direct evidence of that. Right, that Russia would be doing something else. Will there be retaliation? Sure. It will be calculated. Will it be retaliation that Russia wouldn't have necessarily made anyway, and will simply be called retaliation? I don't know. We'll have to see what the extent of that is. Obviously, the number one target to me should be the Kiev regime's intelligence. Because they at least carried it out. I would also hope that in the scope of going after the Kiev regime's intelligence, they try to go after all of the Western intelligence that are actually on the ground, at least, helping them out, or, green lighting at the very least.
See, that's right there, Mark. That's my point. If they got the ability to do that, and they had the ability to do that, why weren't they doing it already? That's what I mean by restraint. Like,
okay. So Russia has gone after the Kiev regime's intelligence, particularly their military intelligence, but also SBU installations multiple times before, right? Russia has not gone after political, right? They have not tried to assassinate, no matter the propaganda claims to the contrary, right? There haven't been any assassination attempts from the Russian government on Zelensky or others, where they, routinely go after political assassination of political leaders, military leaders, thousands of political leaders, activists, everyone across the former Ukrainian states, right? Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, Zaporozhye, and Crimea. That's a regular feature. Russia doesn't go after the political leaders because it doesn't believe that achieves anything. In fact, they believe that most of the Kiev regime's officials and leaders, like Zelensky, that they're so bad at what so incompetent, so bad at what they do, that replacing them would only increase the chance that someone more competent would have the position, right? But the competent people planning this out, such as they are competent, and there's question, right? The whole British planned cross the Dnieper Krinky crusade to take Crimea, that was not competence, right? That was just complete, utter military fantasy and failure. Likewise, the Mark Milley planned southern offensive, right, into Zaporozhye. That was not competence. But, occasionally they get off successes. And I certainly believe they had their finger in this thing. But again, this is not something that's going to change any type of strategic realities or, realities on the course of the battlefield. It hurts. It's a black eye, if you want, or something, but ultimately it's more about narrative than it is about military success.
Let me ask you something. So, from my point of view, you're far too rational, right? Like the way that I feel about it.
I flip. Some days I get emotional, right? Sometimes I don't. Today might be one of my I'm bipolar, right? Today is more my rational.
I feel far more brutal about this. Yeah. And I guess my thing is, if Russia actually wants negotiations and they actually want a deal, then savage prosecution of the war seems to be the better way to get it. Donald Trump has been.
I think they are doing. I mean, you could argue that it should be more savage, but I think they are going about that. Again, I don't necessarily believe that having Medinsky sit in Istanbul is necessarily a restraint or limitation on what the Russian military is doing on the battlefield. And just blowing stuff up with their Oreshniks in Ukraine may not necessarily be the best response or general strategy going before. Yeah, the Kremlin and the Stavka, the Russian military leaders, they're pretty cold-blooded. They're pretty rational, right? Yeah. And at the end of the day, they're probably more cold-blooded and rational than I am. And in general, that's a good thing. Even if a gut emotional response at any given moment, makes me, curse things like this that happen, right? I do believe that, generally speaking, they know better. They've certainly made some mistakes, right? And again, there was a mistake. There was an intelligence failure, right? I will not contest that, in the slightest. But that doesn't mean that the correct response is to go all half-cocked and to blow stuff up with Oreshniks to satisfy, some type of emotional a demand for revenge, for retribution. I think the retribution should be cold-blooded and calculated.
No, I understand. In fact, I told the audience that's what you were going to say. Before you got
I'm sorry. Again, like this is a rational day for me.
And that's a negative. They have a strategy and they're enacting their strategy. I do get it. And it's like, this doesn't change anything. Yeah.
Russia is beating all of NATO on the battlefield, and all the attempts to obfuscate that and claim otherwise. They've survived an existential economic war that would crush all but probably one other country in the world, right? If it was leveled at them, maybe one or two, right? They have endured the entire military might that could be employed by not just NATO, not just the collective West, but anyone else they could rope into sending resources.
Serbia,
Pakistan, Israel, Serbia, sending last. They've done all of that, and Russia is still. The comparison that came out of the Pentagon about a month ago, someone compared to the Russian advances as like a slow-moving lava flow, right? That you can move back out of the way, but the advance of that lava flow is inexorable, right? There's nothing you're going to do to stop it, and that's like the Russian advances here. Could be faster, right? There would be a cost for that, a cost diplomatically, a cost militarily, a cost potentially to political stability within Russia, and they have all these things calculated. And without saying that they can't make mistakes, they have made mistakes. I'll be willing to give them a fair shake here and see what they do in response and see. Again, we can talk intelligence failure. We can talk about that every airbase should have hardened facilities for all of their aircraft wherever they are in Russia. Those are two things that I wouldn't argue with at all. And those are legitimate criticisms. But just don't fall victim to that emotional need for some type of big bang. That's such such a male thing. Admittedly, I am part of that gender, that sex, I should say, myself, right? And so I certainly understand the impulse, right? Someone strikes me, I want to strike them back. And I don't want to take an eye for an eye. I want to take two eyes for one.
Right.
Right. But the Kremlin is remarkably cold-blooded and calculated, and they are restrained, I believe, primarily in the interest of long-range strategic calculations and avoiding World War III more than anything else. Again, it's not a guarantee that they get things right, but I trust them more than I trust my gut response.
What do you say about this notion that the longer the war goes, the more attempts that NATO has to attack Russia? Because
it's undoubtedly absolutely true.
You say absolutely true?
Absolutely true. Yeah. Of course, they will read anything as Russia's weakness, right? Anytime Russia shows restraint or waits and does something, the West only understands strength, and what's more, they only understand obvious and crude demonstrations of strength, right? And doubtless this will encourage them to do more such dirty tricks. The only thing I can say is it took them a year and a half to plan and execute this, right? They can plan a few more of these things and give Russia a few more pokes and stings along the way. And at the end of the day, Russia is still going to remove that regime in Kiev at the end.
One last thing before I let you go. So there are reports that Russia is preparing for an overwhelming offensive. And apparently there's a massive military buildup at certain locations. Where's the airbase? One airbase in particular, I had this thing right here. So it says, I think it's called LL 76 transport plane has arrived at the Russian Ingles 2 airbase. It's already the 8th flight in 4 days. Such activity was recorded for the first time in the last 3 years. So Ukraine is basically reporting that Russia is in a buildup phase, especially from the standpoint of their armaments at some of these air bases. Do you think that is part to why the attack took place on the air bases in this way? I mean, obviously, if they took this along the planet, they were already going after it. And the thing that I was getting at with the NATO part was because going after Russia's strategic planes like that was a specific NATO target. Even bombing the railroads was, again, that was something that NATO talked about, saying, hey, we can blow up the Russian railways, and this would slow down their ability, and we can use IEDs to do it. That's exactly what they did. They were going after Russia's ability to strike back in regards to some kind of nuclear assault, meaning if the US, well, let's say NATO versus Russia, and it ends up being a nuclear conflict, they wanted to damage Russia's ability to respond in kind. I mean, these were NATO attacks. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. Like, the longer the war goes on, the more they get the opportunity to strike from the shadows where Russia can't create a justification to actually go after them. But I'm sorry.
No. I agree with that, right? I believe there are both, there are, rationales, that were probably both considered. Yes, this is deteriorating Russia's nuclear strategic assets. It's also deteriorating their strategic conventional assets, right? Carriers to launch cruise missiles, for the conflict in Ukraine. And I very much believe that movement into angles is about, Russia almost preparing for more and larger missile strikes, right? That's almost, so yes. But that almost certainly factors into the Kiev regime's, desire to limit this. But again, at the end of the day, despite events like this, right, that NATO undoubtedly had their hands in, the U.S. Supreme Commander Cavioli, General Cavioli of the NATO armed forces in Europe, has himself testified multiple times that at the end of the day, the Russian military is far larger, more capable, more experienced, more skilled, more evolved equipment, more just absolutely pumping military industrial complex. If the goal of this is to weaken Russia, it's not working. You're only making the bear stronger and angrier. At the end of the day, we can endure these stings. We can even endure a few black eyes and bloody pointed stick wounds, right? But at the end of the day,
it doesn't change anything on the ground.
I don't think, again, that word inexorable again and again and again. And it's not absolutely inexorable. The Kremlin is balancing a lot of things. They're balancing domestic political support that is essential. It's essential for 40 to 50 or 60,000 guys signing up, volunteer, motivated soldiers to participate in this. It's essential for the domestic political support that across society for the SMO that drives this. They're balancing the economy, right, to make sure, once again, that the political side inside Russia, the domestic, doesn't become disenchanted because of domestic political things. They also want to maintain a strong domestic economy and ramp up the military industrial. They're balancing so many different things in this, and to try for us to armchair focus on any particular one at any particular time. I mean, I guess you could argue that as media figures and analysts, that's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
But I am perfectly willing, when I believe it is necessary, to criticize the Russian government. And I've done so on many, many, many occasions. But I also believe in being cool-headed and restrained in that criticism till I get enough of the facts that I believe are warranted. And I said there are certain things we can consider here.
Yeah, that's fair.
But ultimately, I think there is a reason why the Russian government is going through this diplomatic pantomime. And I find it annoying, at some level, like, oh my God, is this nonsense still going on? Okay, let's check and see what happened on the battlefield, right? That's where I am. But I'm
Speaking of that,
I don't
the
think
memorandum.
it's necessarily bad. Yes.
No, no, I agree with you. I don't think going through they should go through the diplomacy. I'm not against it at all. I guess my thing was brutality more so. But the memorandum, I don't know another way to say it, right? The memorandum itself.
More bombs, bigger bombs.
Right. So Ukraine brings their dead letter path to peace, which is complete nonsense.
Yeah.
Their
demands for an unconditional ceasefire, right?
Yeah, which again is complete nonsense. Did Russia ever out theirs?
I'm sorry?
Did Russia ever out theirs? I don't remember Russia ever.
No, not yet. No, they haven't yet. Okay. And they refused to. They said, we're not going to release it beforehand. We're not going to allow the West time to prepare a response for the Kiev regime for this. We're not going to allow media to manipulate it beforehand. We'll present it at the actual meeting with the Ukrainians on the other side of the table. And that is a diplomatic maneuver itself. Yeah. Right. They're all extremely angry and frustrated and everything. And that's part of Russia's diplomatic game that is going on. No, we're not going to tell you what's in it beforehand. This is a high stakes, serious diplomatic negotiation involving a conflict. Right. We'll do it the proper way. We're not going to leak it to the media beforehand. There's something to say about this. And ultimately, what the Kiev regime and its Western backers are doing now with regards to their demands for a ceasefire. I saw a meme posted by the Irish journalist Che Boys.
Yes.
That summarized it completely for me. It was the picture, like a pen and ink drawing of two Roman gladiators, one defeated and one standing above him with the sword and looking to the crowd for the thumbs up, thumbs down signal. And the one on the ground, of course, is the Kiev regime in Ukraine. And they're turning to the crowd and saying, I demand a 30-day ceasefire. Unconditionally, right? I mean, that's where it is.
I mean, these plans are going to be irreconcilable. Russia's already, for the most part, given their plan. They haven't deviated from it for the past several years.
No, they have not. They haven't moved an inch. Not one concession. Not anything. They don't feel they need to. Again, we'll go through. The pantomime. We'll go through the pretense. But ultimately, you don't agree to our terms, then we'll achieve the terms on the battlefield. If you agree to our terms, then this can all end now.
Do you think Trump walks?
No, I don't believe he can. I think there's just too much institutional pressure, too much U.S. national interests. Even considering that on a personal level, I believe that Trump has nothing but contempt for Zelensky. He hates the European political elite. He doesn't personally care that much about Ukraine, but still, he is now the U.S. president. He owns this war. The U.S. interest that he can't separate himself from is the U.S. interest is preserving a U.S. proxy regime in Ukraine as best he can. And I don't believe that he can walk away from it. I mean, I certainly, if I was a hoping man, which I don't do hope, I would say that I hope that he can shrug that off and walk away, but I don't believe it. I any more than I believe that he was going to have an administration not full of neocons.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean,
I think he will gripe and he will scream, and it's not my war, it's Biden, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, he will find himself dragged more and more back into doing what the Biden administration was doing, which is more ineffectual sanctions and scraping the barrel of whatever military supplies they can provide to the Kiev regime to keep it fighting as long as possible and probably a little time after that. right? And it will drag this out, and it will raise the costs to Russia. But I do believe that he probably won't ever be as full-throated in that support as the Biden administration was, right? At least for the moment, the U.S. is not literally firing ballistic missiles into mainland Russia, right? I mean, we were there. We were at a Cuban Missile Crisis, perhaps greater moment. And the only thing that prevented that was the Kremlin's belief that whatever else the Trump administration was going to do, it was going to back off that degree of provocation. And to be fair, up to this point, they have, right? So, I mean, I don't expect or hope or give the Trump administration much credit for anything else. But I will give them credit for we're not literally at World War III right now. The Russian side already showed restraint. The Trump side backed off of what Biden was doing, at least in that regard, up until this moment as well.
I guess the question is, and this could be the last one, at some point, Zelensky is going to run out of money. And they've already started begging people for what, $44 billion for 2026, something like that, some insane amount of money.
The Kiev regime requires somewhere between $40 and $60 billion just of economic support to pay the bills, right? To pay the soldiers, to pay the bureaucrats, to keep what lights it has on. That's not even talking military aid. That's because the Kiev regime really has no effective economy at this point, right? They require somewhere between 40 and 60 billion just to keep them going. The thing is that, the U.S. can just print money on demand, right?
Well, that's the question. Do you think Trump is going to do that? That's exactly what I was going to ask you. And this could be the last question. Do you think he's going to, because at some point the question is going to come up. Is Congress going to pass an appropriations bill to give Zelensky money? And can he even politically do
that? That's a tough call.
That's a tough one, right? I don't know the answer to that one either.
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, anyone who says they can really predict Trump, I think is wrong, because Trump doesn't. He's constantly changing his mind according to the people around him, right? That are convincing him. The last person who talked to him 15 minutes ago, right? I don't necessarily believe that he has too many strongly held opinions, other than that William McKinley was cool and that was the golden age of America, right? Tariffs good, sanctions bad. I mean, I'm laughing, but we're mocking, but I really, it's hard to pin. That's why Putin at one point said Kamala Harris and Biden were predictable. Trump is not. We prefer a predictable adversary to an unpredictable one by and large.
Mark Sloboda, International.
Penalty free or have it sent directly.
Intelligence operation planned and executed by the Ukrainians, but clearly the West was involved. A Pyrrhic victory, by classic Pyrrhic victory, which means a sort of a tactical win, but a strategic defeat for Ukraine. And, candidly, the exuberance and the giddiness being expressed in the West over the so-called devastation of the Russian Air Force is just, it's not only wrong, but it's ridiculous. Yes,
How many times have you seen the phrase in the past 8 or 9 hours, Pearl Harbor, as if to compare what Ukraine did with Russian intelligence, about which more in a minute, with what happened on December 7th, 1941?
Yeah, well, actually, I think it's an appropriate analogy. Not in terms, because remember, that Japanese attack was supposed to destroy all the U.S. aircraft carriers and decimate the U.S. Navy. What happened? Japan got its ass kicked because the carriers were still intact. And 4 or 5 months later, at the Battle of Midway, the United States wiped out 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. So, all these morons in the press using that as a metaphor or an analogy, obviously they know nothing of history. But I think the parallel is correct in the fact that the attack of Pearl Harbor was described by Admiral Yamamoto as, "We have awakened a sleeping giant." Up to this point, Russia's been content to carry out the special military operation, which means this has not gone to a full-fledged war footing. I think that's now going to change. And I think Russia's going to move towards a war footing, which means targets that previously they ignored or kept off limits are now going to be on the target list. And this is going to lead to greater devastation in the part of Ukraine because, candidly, they may have hit or damaged 7 aircraft. And, I'm not trying to pretend that it was it meant absolutely nothing. But what it did symbolize was these aircraft were vulnerable because Russia's abiding by the START II treaty, which requires those bombers to be visible. Now that the West is allowing them to be attacked, and I'll note that Donald Trump and his administration, we don't know nothing about this. Well, that's called plausible deniability. I guarantee you, at least one, if not more, officers within the Central Intelligence Agency knew about this and may have even been involved with the planning for it and the operation of it.
Isn't it inconceivable that John Ratcliffe, director of CIA, or Tulsi Gabbard, director of National Intelligence, or Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, or President Trump himself did not know about this? How credible are those denials?
Well, that's why it's called plausible deniability. Yeah, sometimes you keep the principals in the dark so that they don't know about it because that's deliberately how they wanted it. Don't tell me about this, just go get it done.
How confident are you of the fingerprints of CIA, MI6, and perhaps Mossad on this?
100%. Just the operation of initiating, turning the drones on. Because think of the process. You've got them, hidden under this roof, so the roof has to open up. That requires an external command. Now, the reports are that they were using the Russian phone network, maybe, but I think Starlink, Elon Musk's operation, was involved with this as well. You can't rule out satellite communications, and as a source of overhead imagery. It was reported, and I've seen no confirmation of it, that Pete Hegseth was watching the attack real time, which means he absolutely knew it was coming off. And the Ukrainians had other drones with video capability, which in part explains why you're seeing some of the drone footage that's out there. But some of it has also been, AI, ginned up by artificial intelligence.
Well, here's the BBC version. It's a little under 2 minutes. Alistair Crook downplays it substantially, and we've been chided for even relying on the BBC. I'm not relying on it for accuracy, but this is what the West wants us to believe, and I'll be happy to hear your thoughts, Larry. Cut number 1.
Far from Ukraine's borders, an attack of astonishing audacity. Russian strategic bombers picked off one by one by a fleet of drones. Ukraine calling this Operation Spider's Web, personally overseen by President Zelensky. One of Kiev's boldest attacks so far, a reminder, despite Russia's overwhelming strength in numbers, that Ukraine is a resourceful, determined enemy. Sources say this took a year and a half to prepare. Dozens of drones smuggled into Russia, stored on wooden pallets, loaded onto trucks, driven to distant air bases and launched remotely. Swarms of drones picked up on social media from Siberia to the Arctic Circle. At a petrol station north of Irkutsk, a glimpse of the operation in progress. With smoke already rising behind, a drone emerges from the truck and heads off to join the attack. Moments later, another, and gunfire as police officers try to bring it down. Ukraine claims to have done a staggering $7 billion worth of damage and knocked out a third of the planes Russia uses to deliver cruise missiles.
Ми розуміємо, з ким маємо справу.
We know exactly whom we are dealing with. We will defend ourselves by every means available to us, available to Ukraine, available to Ukrainians. Not for a single moment did we want this war. We offered the Russians a ceasefire.
Earlier, a different kind of wreckage, this the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia, after the country suffered another major drone and missile attack. Elsewhere, 12 Ukrainian soldiers were killed at a training base, the head of Ukraine's land forces tendering his resignation. What chance then for another round of peace talks set to take place in Istanbul? Russian and Ukrainian delegations are expected to be there, but after 24 hours of mayhem, the omens for a breakthrough.
Maybe the only accurate thing in there is that the omen for a breakthrough does not look good.
Yeah.
Reuters reported that they stopped talking after less than an hour. But let me ask you about the accuracy. 7 billion in losses, 1/3 of the Russian fleet. Is that accurate, Larry?
No, it's not accurate. And note that at least 2 of the planes that Russia is, other channels are reporting up to 7 planes were destroyed or damaged. And not all of the air bases that Ukraine claims were actually hit, because several of those air bases, their electronic warfare defense systems, downed the attacking drones. But this is another example of, again, Western-backed propaganda. That this is what the coordination of this with the CIA. This news report is just a case in point that the CIA and MI6, through their information operations, information warfare, they put this information out in order to, expand it. Because what they're trying to do is convince, in part, Donald Trump that, boy, Ukraine's got an excellent chance. They can still pull this off, and Russia's weak. Look, they can't stop it. But ignoring everything that's taking place, particularly on the ground. This was, it was a PR black eye for Russia, certainly. But, you don't win war on PR black eyes. You win war on how many people you kill on the battlefield. And on that front, Russia has a decisive advantage.
Were there civilian casualties? Did these drones attack a domestic train line?
Well, there were civilian casualties caused by a couple of the trailers. In one case, one driver had some suspicions, like, this doesn't feel right. And as he got up to examine it, it blew up and I think killed him. But the civilian casualties that were suffered over the weekend came from, I don't classify, Russia's classifying this attack on the strategic air bases as a terrorist attack. I don't put that as a terrorist attack. They're a legitimate military target. Ukraine found out a way to try to attack it. That's not terrorism.
Right.
The attack on the civilian passenger train in Bryansk, and then which was caused by detonating a bridge, bringing it down onto the train, as well as another bridge that was blown up in Kursk. Those are acts of terrorism. Those serve no military purpose, or the primary purpose, in particular with the one in Bryansk, was when the Ukrainians blew it, they waited until they saw that train coming, so that when they detonated the bridge, that the bridge would cause damage to the train. And they killed at least 12 people. That was terrorism.
If Hegseth did watch this, And he knew about it ahead of time, obviously, if he was watching it.
Yeah.
Wouldn't he have had an obligation to inform the president?
Again, plausible deniability, Judge. There's certain things you don't tell the president, so the president can legitimately say, gee, I didn't know about that.
Will the Russians ever trust Donald Trump? Here he is trying to negotiate with Vladimir Putin, and his Central Intelligence Agency is trying to blow up Russian assets and kill Russian civilians.
I don't think the Russians trust Donald Trump. They recognize, I think they understand Trump for what Trump is, and they're going to deal with him accordingly, but they're not going to take any of his promises to the bank. You know, Trump already really discredited himself over the course of the last week, where, you know, still he's not come out and denounced the Ukrainian attacks on these Russian bases. Hasn't, to my knowledge, has not said a word about it. The only thing we do know is that Lavrov and Secretary of State Rubio had a conversation yesterday. So far, Russia's not released a readout of that conversation.
I would imagine Lavrov, and you and I know him, read Rubio the Riot Act.
Yeah, and in Lavrov, you know, without yelling, without getting emotional, but sending a very clear message. I suggested that maybe Rubio, after the conversation, had to go change his underwear. But it is, they understand that here's Trump, who has been condemning Russia over the past week for Russia's previous strikes on May 24th and 25th inside Ukraine, without mentioning word one about the 1,400 Ukrainian attacks that preceded that in the week prior to May 24th. So, you know, I think Russia recognized that Donald Trump's not an honest broker. Donald Trump is not an objective guy in this process. And I think they also understand Donald Trump faces many political constraints at home, but they would prefer to have a dialogue. And look, the good news yesterday is at least Rubio and Lavrov talked. That's you know, that didn't happen under Biden.
Did the United States attack Russia?
If I was Russia, I'd say yes. You know, this, you know, I'll take you back. You're the judge. So if you've got a guy sitting in front of you who has shot a woman on the street, and there's a guy in the audience that supplied this guy with a gun, knowing that he was capable of shooting people, that he was vowing to attack this woman, would you consider that guy in the audience equally culpable?
Well, the guy in the audience would be arrested by the prosecutors and their agents immediately.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that simple. We are accessories to the crime.
Could you imagine, and you and I and our colleagues have talked about this till we're blue in the face, if the situation were reversed, if somebody sent drones into the United States to attack American military installations and destroy a train on which civilians were riding, our response would be over the top.
Yeah, we'd be furious. Well, you know, and we even saw, like, after 9/11, we went out and attacked countries that didn't even have anything to do with 9/11,
Right.
namely Iraq. So, you know, we use these things as an excuse. Russia is focused upon bringing an end to this, as they say, dealing with the root causes. And as you correctly noted, with the talks today in Istanbul, they concluded at the end of the hour. The Russians, even though I talked with Pepe Escobar early this morning, and he said, yeah, these are dead on arrival, these talks. But Russia's not walking away from it. Russia's not going to be the one saying, you know, screw you, we're going to kill you. You know, Russia's continue to keep the high road, which I think is just driving the Ukrainians crazy. Because Russia said, okay, now next agreement we'll have is we'll agree to exchange bodies of soldiers. We'll call on certain spots on the front line, 2 to 3 day ceasefire, so you can come collect your bodies.
What kind of pressure is there on President Putin to send, and I'm just going to use this phrase as a metaphor, Oreshniks to Kyiv?
Oh, I think there's significant pressure. You know, this is what's also sort of, you know, puzzling, peculiar, and insane about the apparent Western strategy that seems that, man, if we only get rid of Putin, boy, things will be okay with Russia. And it's like, are you kidding? You want to deal with Medvedev? What this illustrates, this latest incident, is that the public opinion in Russia is growing more supportive of harsher actions against Ukraine, not less, more. And Putin, to his credit, is trying to keep those emotions from guiding and controlling Russian decisions.
It sounds as though Zelensky and his colleagues did not consider the natural and probable consequences of this, one of which is what you just articulated, coalescing Russian, it was already coalesced, but reinforcing Russian public opinion behind President Putin. I just wonder what you think President Putin will and should do. They're very close to achieving, what you and Ritter and McGovern and McGregor have told us, they're very close to achieving their goals on the ground.
Well, you got to ask, what is the strategy? You know, you carry out certain actions to ultimately accomplish a goal. Was the strategy in this to destroy Russia's strategic bomber force? Well, in order to weaken Russia so that Russia would feel compelled to surrender? Well, if that was the strategic goal, it failed.
Yeah.
In fact, you have to look at the opposite consequence. It has now emboldened Russia to pursue the war in a more aggressive fashion to the detriment of Ukraine. And that's the problem. What you have here with Ukrainians is complete lack of strategic thought. They are all focused on tactics. You know, they basically have like the brain of a teenager. The teenager is thinking only about immediate gratification, immediate pleasure, not thinking about, if I do X, it's going to lead to Y and Z, and what will be my preparations to deal with that outcome. So they are not taking steps to shore up their ability to stop the Russian advance on the ground. And now they have basically energized the entire Russian population to a greater degree than was the case, say, 2 months ago, about the need to destroy Ukraine. And that's where this is headed.
Here's a great military strategist from South Carolina. I can't even say this with a straight face. Cut number 2.
We saw credible evidence of a summer, early fall invasion, a new offensive by Putin. He's playing the game at the peace table. He's preparing for more war. And I think the Senate is fed up with Putin. The American people see Putin as unreasonable. They say Ukraine is trying. President Trump has made that distinction real. So the Senate and the House of Representatives in the next 2 weeks will be moving forward with a sanction bill that's bone crushing.
Yeah, you know, Lindsey's been wrong about every one of his predictions with respect to Ukraine and Russia. I have it on solid authority that Lindsey is financially compromised vis-a-vis Ukraine, and that is actually going in the process of being investigated, which will help explain a lot why he is just so blindly insistent upon keeping this war growing. I guess you keep it going if you're making money off of it. It's a good deal. But the notion that the Senate is going, you know, I think the Senate likely will pass the sanctions on. It's not sanctions on Russia; it's sanctions on India and China. And if they think that's going to make India and China crumple into a fetal position and say, "Oh yeah, we got to surrender to the United States," it's just going to infuriate them more. What Graham and his ilk do not understand is that this kind of actions by the United States, our insistence upon being the hegemon, being the guy in charge, is alienating the vast majority of the world's population and the countries that actually control natural resources. So counterproductive.
Here's Senator Graham's traveling companion and new friend, the Liberal Democrat, Senator Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut, in the same interview. Cut number 3.
Putin is playing President Trump. He's taking him for a sucker. He is, in effect, stalling and stonewalling, prolonging the conversation so that he can mount this offensive and take control of more territory on the ground. If I were President Trump, I'd be insulted and offended by this affront personally, as well as to the United States of America. And America should be angry, deeply angry.
In fairness to the two of them, these interviews were given before the Ukrainian attack. I don't know if they knew about it. How could I possibly know?
I'm sure they were briefed on it while they were there. Absolutely. This is, but okay. America's angry. What are you going to do about it, America? Send them a sternly worded letter? What America is doing is enabling the terrorism, facilitating the continued military activities of Ukraine, and basically ensuring that probably another 400,000 to 500,000 Ukrainians are going to die before this thing is over. So, the United States is an accessory to murder.
Larry, I know you're traveling, but hope we can hook you up with Ray McGovern by the end of the week. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for the forcefulness and clarity of the analysis.
Where is Donald Trump? Where are the statements condemning the aggression from either side during negotiations? Because according to Donald Trump, just a few days ago, that was sacrosanct. You simply cannot attack your opponent in the middle of a negotiation. So what happened, Donald? Where is the statement condemning what has happened yesterday? Not to mention the attack in Bryansk, which was an attack on civilians. It wasn't an attack on a military target. Hello, my friends. I hope you're all doing well. Today is Monday, the 2nd of June, and this is my first video update for today. Yesterday, we've had Ukraine's large-scale drone attack on Russian airfields targeting Russian strategic bombers. But you see, yesterday, we were very much zoomed in on what was going on as it was going on. Today, I want us to take the complete opposite approach. Take a step back, zoom out, and look at the big picture and understand why this happened, how it happened, and what can it be done for this to be prevented in the future. Also, in usual fashion, Ukrainska Pravda is right over there, ready to deliver some propaganda. And we also have some reactions. Speaking of reactions, by the way, do you know whose reaction is nowhere to be found? Donald Trump's, which is unfortunate because it was just a few days ago when he has criticized Vladimir Putin for attacking Ukraine in the middle of a negotiation. Well, according to Donald Trump, apparently, if you're negotiating, or at least appear to be negotiating, all hostilities must stop. Personally, I thought that was the definition of a ceasefire, but not according to Donald Trump. However, he has yet to provide a reaction to this. But don't you worry, we're going to get to that. Also, we have Lindsey Graham and Mr. Blumenthal, who have delivered many reactions, but not necessarily regarding yesterday's attack. However, let us begin with what went on yesterday. In a nutshell, the Ukrainians have hidden their attack drones in wooden crates. Then they've loaded those crates onto some lorries. They've then driven the lorries close to the Russian airfields. And from there, I think you can already get the picture. The drones have taken off and have targeted the Russian aircraft. But the thing that struck me the most was the reaction from the green t-shirt, and especially from the European leaders. None of them seem to realize the gravity of the situation. They're all cheering, they're all saying, yes, we've managed to do this. They all brag about it. but none of them realizes that what they have just done is that they've attacked one of Russia's nuclear components. And this, according to the Russian nuclear doctrine, makes it legal for Russia to take the worst possible response into account. But I don't think they fully grasp it. However, let me waffle no more and take you straight to Ukrainska Pravda, because we're going to elaborate a lot more on the story. Zelensky on Ukrainian operation targeting aircraft in Russia. 117 drones were used, and office was next to FSB headquarters. Volodymyr Zelensky has described an operation by the Security Service of Ukraine, the SSU, that destroyed more than 40 strategic aircraft at Russian airfields as having achieved a brilliant result that will go down in the history books. And here comes the first piece of this nice, beautiful propaganda puzzle. They're saying that they've destroyed 40 Russian aircraft. Well, I've looked at all the imagery which was available online, which, by the way, I don't want to show here because I don't want any problems with YouTube, but you can easily find it pretty much anywhere at this point. And I could count at most 7 planes which were on fire. 2 of them, Tu-95s by the way, they look to have been destroyed. They have suffered catastrophic damage. But the other 5, they were on fire, but they didn't exactly present signs of suffering some catastrophic damage themselves. However, I might be wrong. I'm not an engineer, far from it, and maybe in the end, all of those planes will have to be written off. But even if that's the case, even if you was to write off all 7 of them, well, that's still very, very far from number 40, which the green t-shirt presents us with. Why 40? Well, maybe it's a round number. Maybe it's a number that psychologists have determined that people would easily remember. Who knows? But one thing is for certain, this is what propagandists always do. They take a little bit of truth and then they wrap it around a lot of lies. Because for some reason, a big lie is far easier for people to believe than a small lie. This is why they always go big when they tell lies. Nevertheless, let's continue. And this is a quote from the green t-shirt. An absolutely brilliant result, an independent achievement by Ukraine. 1 year, 6 months, and 9 days from the start of planning to effective implementation. Our most far-reaching operation. Our people who prepared the operation were withdrawn from Russian territory in time. He's making it sound as if this was the most complex military operation in the history of mankind. However, reality is slightly different. The truth is that yesterday's attack has just proven one more time that you can cause severe damage with very small cheap items, such as attack drones. Anybody with a drone can do what the green t-shirt has done yesterday. It shouldn't really be that complicated. And this also has exposed a weakness in Russia's defense. Now the question for the Russians is, how do you protect those planes in the future? Because personally, again, I'm not a military expert, but apart from building concrete hangars to protect the planes, I don't see what else you can do. Because electronic warfare works to a point and up to a point. But as technology advances, you always have to keep up with it. Whereas a concrete hangar, at least you know is there, and the cheap attack drones cannot do anything to that. Again, this is just my guess. But this is the harsh reality. But the green t-shirt, he makes it sound as if, look, the most brilliant minds on earth have all congregated to concoct this complex military operation, when reality is that anybody with a drone and a remote can actually do what he has done. Now let's move on. Quote, of course, we cannot reveal everything now, but these are Ukrainian actions that will definitely be in the history books, Zelensky added. It's the second time we see the expression history books being brought up by Ukrainska Pravda and the green t-shirt. And that's exactly right. This is what he's aiming for. Since Kursk last year, he had nothing in the media to prop him up, apart from empty statements from the likes of Kaja Kallas, Ursula von der Leyen, Macron, Starmer, Scholz, Merz, all of those people. Nobody was really propping him up. And now this PR stunt is definitely putting him right up on the front page. This is why he's so excited. But again, in this excitement, I don't think he realizes what he has just done. But let's carry on. Quote, the most interesting thing, and we can now say this publicly, is that our operations office in Russia was located right next to the FSB office in one of the regions. Now that makes absolutely no sense unless you believe Hollywood movies are actually real, which they're not. I know it's a shock. This is why I'm gonna go back to the previous point I was making. People believe a big lie far easier than they believe a small lie. This is why these people always shoot for the sky each time they open their mouth. because that's what they think works best on people. And sometimes it actually does. But I want to add 2 more points before I move on to Mr. Lindsey Graham. One of the points is, have you noticed how many times he has used the word independent operation, Ukrainian operation? He's basically trying to signal to the world, look, this was all us. We take all the credit. Nobody has had anything else to do with it. We didn't receive any outside help. Now, past experience tells us otherwise. The Wiesbaden NATO base in Germany tells us otherwise. Because most of the times the green t-shirt has done something in Russia, it was done through the intelligence data which the United States is actually supporting them with. But this is a detail they all want to move away from. The story is far more complicated, and I think it deserves its own topic, as in who has helped with this operation, but don't you worry, in time I think everything will be revealed. The second point I'm trying to emphasize is that this has happened on the eve, on the cusp of the second round of talks between Russia and Ukraine. Is that a coincidence? Well, obviously not. I think we stopped believing in coincidences a few centuries ago. This is a clear attempt to derail any sort of talks between Russia and Ukraine. And the green t-shirt has absolutely no interest to get this over with. And this was a message to Moscow. And I think the message will receive a response sooner rather than later. Now let's move on to Mr. Graham. Trump ally Senator Graham pushes for new sanctions on Russia ahead of G7 summit. And this comes from Mr. Blumenthal and Mr. Graham. Quote, by the G7 summit, we hope to have sanctions put in place in coordination with Europe to deliver an unequivocal message to China, they said, after talks in Paris with French officials. So that is the latest justification for putting more sanctions on Russia, to send a message to China, apparently. I mean, how more hypocritical can this situation get? How more clownish? I think it has reached the peak, but every time I think that, they prove us wrong. It's incredible. I don't know why they even bother. I don't think they even need a reason to place more sanctions, because they'll do it anyway. They have the power to do it, you know, the power of the dollar. This is what it leads to. But now apparently it's being done to send a message to China. Well, how about you pick up the phone and call Mr. Xi Jinping and have a conversation. Deliver a direct message. Stop sanctioning everybody else in the process. How about that, Mr. Graham? But you see, Mr. Graham is being presented as a Trump ally. And this is a good point, actually. Is Mr. Graham speaking for Donald Trump when he asks for more sanctions on Russia or not? Because who's actually leading the United States? It's an open question, by the way. Graham and Blumenthal noted that their sanctions bill against Russia, which provides for the introduction of a 500% tariff on imports from countries that buy Russian energy resources, has been supported by 82 senators. And that right there is the reason for why I keep saying that it doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrat. This has been the foreign policy of the United States regarding Russia since 1991. There was never any desire on the part of any US administration to stop the escalation, to stop the NATO's eastward expansion. It was all just to choke Russia. And that's just proof of that. It doesn't matter if it comes from senators who are Republican or Democrat. The policy is the same. It's the uni party. Everybody's united singing Kumbaya. Graham and Blumenthal also held a phone conversation with French President Emmanuel Macron. Quote, we assured President Macron and his team that we believe Putin is playing games regarding peace and is actually preparing for a military offensive in the late summer or early fall, they said. So according to Mr. Graham and Mr. Blumenthal and the other 82 senators, Russia is not allowed to fight, because according to their logic, for as long as Russia fights, well, that's a clear indication that Russia is not ready for peace or even negotiations. Well, in what universe does this logic make any sort of sense? It really doesn't. I don't believe that people can become stupid overnight. And what Mr. Graham is saying is not very smart, which leaves us with one option. Why? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? These are all political games, and this is all representing someone else's interest. Who knows? Maybe from the military-industrial complex. They have every single interest in keeping this war going on. Zelensky changes composition of delegation for talks with Russia in Istanbul. Volodymyr Zelensky has approved the composition of Ukraine's delegation for the talks with Russia in Istanbul, expanding it to 14 members, whereas the first round of negotiations involved 12 delegates. I don't even know why he has even bothered. I don't think it makes a difference if you have 12 delegates or 14 delegates. especially after what happened yesterday. But I guess it remains to be seen because Russia and Ukraine are due to negotiate in just a few hours from now, from the moment of me recording this video. But I want to end this episode on the following note. Where is Donald Trump? Where are the statements condemning the aggression from either side during negotiations? Because according to Donald Trump, just a few days ago, that was sacrosanct. You simply cannot attack your opponent in the middle of a negotiation. So what happened, Donald? Where is the statement condemning what has happened yesterday? Not to mention the attack in Bryansk, which was an attack on civilians. It wasn't an attack on a military target. Nevertheless, my friends, I'll leave you with this.
Because he's afraid of losing power, because then he will have to hold elections and answer to voters for what he has turned Ukraine into over the past 6 years. And then he will have to answer for the stolen hundreds of billions of dollars of budget funds and Western, primarily American, aid. Also not interested in stopping the military actions is the war party in Europe, which has not been implementing the anti-Russia project in Ukraine since at least 2014 in order to allow the military actions to stop without defeat or at least without seriously bleeding Russia. Since Ukraine, having lost millions of its citizens, is on the verge of complete defeat today, the European sponsors of the PMC Ukraine order Zelensky and his clique to continue fighting until the last Ukrainian, which forces the Kiev regime to catch the last Ukrainian men on the streets and throw them into a senseless meat grinder. London, Brussels, Paris, and Berlin, of course, were somewhat discouraged by the desire of the main shareholder of the Ukraine project, the United States, to get out of this senseless and destructive game for Western countries after a new realistically thinking administration came to power in Washington. However, they have not lost hope of returning the Americans to their ranks. They do not hesitate to resort to any provocations and any lies about Russia and its actions in order to force the American president to change his mind. In fact, it is precisely for his attention that all the statements of Western politicians involved in the Ukrainian conflict are calculated, counting on blatant manipulations and omissions to prevent the U.S. president from establishing relations with Russia. Thus, we know that they are vying with each other to bring information to Trump about Russian strikes on Ukrainian military-industrial complex facilities, passing them off as targeted attacks on peaceful facilities, contrary to the facts. At the same time, they are also deliberately keeping silent about the fact that these strikes are being carried out on military targets and enterprises associated with the Ukrainian military-industrial complex, and that they are, among other things, a response to the unprecedented escalation of attacks on peaceful Russian cities by the Kiev regime. Yesterday, we cited the relevant statistics. In order to derail efforts to establish peace, European countries have recently taken a number of steps aimed at unwinding the spiral of escalation. Thus, the new German Chancellor Friedrich Merz recently announced the lifting of restrictions on the range of weapons supplied to Ukraine by Britain, France, Germany, and the United States. He even specified that this happened several months ago. Experts directly link these words with the supply of Taurus missiles to the Kiev regime, which Merz has been begging for since the beginning of the special military operation. Then, however, the German leader tried to back down. He began to speak about how Germany would actually help Ukraine independently establish the production of long-range missiles. Of course, these clumsy maneuvers cannot mislead anyone, and the screwdriver assembly of Taurus missiles, like unmanned British boats, does not make them Ukrainian. Germany will thus find itself even more deeply involved in the war with Russia, which will give us the right to consider all options for an adequate response to this unfriendly step. If there is still a bit of common sense left in Berlin and people who have not forgotten history, they cannot help but understand how new aggressive actions against Russia will end for this country. Less than a month ago, we celebrated the 80th anniversary of the inglorious end of Germany's previous similar adventure, Europe, which has suffered most seriously from German militarism and adventurism. Should also remember this very well. In general, we have to admit that Germany's actions are part of a campaign launched by Europe to sabotage the peace process, an attempt to provoke our country into some kind of retaliatory actions, which they could then present to the American administration as evidence of Moscow's unwillingness to negotiate. Despite the obvious depletion of their own resources, the states of the European Union continue to seek ways to increase military support for the neo-Nazi Kiev regime, which only contributes to further escalation of tension on the European continent. Thus, on May 26, the EU Council approved the creation of a €150 billion fund for the purchase of weapons and ammunition. It is already known that the new instrument called Security Action for Europe will finance some urgent and large-scale investments in the Ukrainian defense industry. In addition, European states shamelessly continue their proxy war with Russia, hoping that all this will remain unpunished. They provide Kiev with satellite intelligence, they train Ukrainian soldiers at NATO military bases, and they send their military advisors to Ukrainian territory. Of course, Great Britain is largely behind all of this. The scale of the involvement of British intelligence services in military operations is so great that it is becoming increasingly difficult for them to hush up such outrageous facts. Thus, at the end of March, British journalists released an expose on this topic. In particular, it talks about how the British cooperated with the Ukrainian military to develop in detail the operation to blow up the Crimean Bridge, and also about the fact that since at least the middle of last year, British and American officers have been monitoring every aspect of the strikes within the framework of this operation, from determining the coordinates of targets to calculating the trajectories of missiles. Colleagues, do you really think that we do not notice all of this and do not have detailed information about the involvement of each of your states in military operations against Russia? Do you think that this will not entail any consequences for you? At the same time, you have long been punishing not Russia, which has perfectly adapted to living under sanctions, but you are punishing yourselves. It is enough to compare the state of the economy of your countries today and 3 years ago to assess how such a thoughtless line affects the sponsors of the Kiev regime until you stop viewing what is happening exclusively as a zero-sum game. The situation for Europe and its satellites will only get worse. In addition, it is finally time for you to realize that there is no miracle weapon capable of turning the tide of a military campaign that is extremely unfavorable for Kiev. Mr. Chairman, I have no doubt that today we will once again hear pre-prepared formulaic speeches from the Western sponsors of the Zelensky regime, accusations against Russia, statements about Ukraine's right to defend itself by any means necessary, and calls for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire as the only evidence of Russia's readiness for peace, or at least a ceasefire for 30 days. However, if we remove the rhetorical wrapper, which is primarily intended to mislead the countries of the global south, the true content of such initiatives becomes obvious. Behind them lies the desire to mislead us once again, to force us to make a new unilateral gesture of goodwill, which will then be used to regroup forces and further saturate Kiev with weapons. This is not a path to peace, but an attempt to take a break in order to continue the confrontation. You can't count on this. There will be no repetition of the Minsk agreements. In principle, we are ready to consider the possibility of establishing a ceasefire, which would later allow us to reach a sustainable resolution of the root causes of the conflict. But for this, we must see reciprocal steps from the other side. We have voiced our concerns more than once. For the duration of the truce, at a minimum, it is necessary for Western countries to stop supplying weapons to the Kiev regime, and for Ukraine to stop mobilization. However, all your statements indicate that you are not satisfied with such a scenario. And we are not satisfied with a situation that will allow the Kiev regime to catch its breath, heal its wounds, and stop the collapse of the Eastern Front. If we are really serious about peace, then we need to discuss its parameters and conditions, and only then agree on a ceasefire. This is precisely what the direct Russian-Ukrainian negotiation process in Istanbul is aimed at. It is now an indicator of the real, not declared, desire of the parties for peace. Moreover, Russia has already unilaterally adhered to a 30-day moratorium on attacks on energy infrastructure and an Easter truce, and a truce in honor of Victory Day. The Kiev regime ignored all these opportunities to demonstrate its readiness for peace. So, what do you want from us now? Mr. Chairman, we have said more than once, and we want to repeat again, that the goals of our special operation can be achieved both peacefully and militarily. Our armed forces are capable of continuing and increasing military operations for as long as necessary. It is enough to look at any military reports, even the most biased ones towards Russia, to see that Russian troops are successfully advancing along almost the entire front line. The Russian Defense Ministry publishes information daily about the liberation of populated areas and the destruction of foreign equipment. Despite this, we have always emphasized our commitment to a political and diplomatic settlement of the crisis. It is of fundamental importance to us that the root causes of the conflict be resolved once and for all. In 2014, as a result of an unconstitutional coup d'etat, supported and sponsored by the United States and the European Union, a regime came to power in Ukraine that intended to exterminate everything Russian. All these years, this regime has violated the rights of residents of the east and south of Ukraine, but also other regions, before your eyes. We cannot, and we will not stand by while millions of Russian-speaking people remain under the rule of a regime whose policies openly violate their fundamental rights and freedoms. If the Kiev neo-Nazi authorities believe that they can achieve an end to hostilities while maintaining the system of repression and discrimination against a significant part of their own population and the rest of Ukraine, then this is a profound delusion. Leaving everything as is means deliberately ignoring the norms of international law and the provisions of the UN Charter. Let me remind you that the first article of the UN Charter clearly states the need to respect human rights regardless of language, race, gender, or religion. Today in Ukraine, we see the opposite. Actual persecution of the Russian-speaking population, restrictions on the activities of the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and gross violations of the rights of other national minorities. In this regard, we call on our European colleagues, who so actively advocate for democratic values, to demand that Kiev repeal discriminatory laws that directly contradict international law. This will be a real test of the authenticity of your position. Until now, we have heard loud statements about human rights, but we have never seen any real steps to protect millions of people whose rights are systematically violated in Ukraine today. Political expediency makes our Western colleagues deaf and dumb when it comes to the rights of the Russian-speaking population, the Russian language, canonical orthodoxy, the glorification of Hitler's henchmen, and the spread of neo-Nazism in Ukraine. If you really want a lasting and sustainable peace in Ukraine, this cannot continue any longer. Mr. Chairman, today is the moment when everyone must make a choice. We made our choice in 2022, and we will not abandon our compatriots, the Russian people, in trouble. If necessary, we will fight for this as long as necessary. And we will no longer allow any threats on our borders, any anti-Russian neo-Nazi entity in our neighborhood. Now it is up to those who stood behind the anti-Russian project in Ukraine. Have you realized your mistakes and the futility of defeating and isolating Russia? If you are driven solely by Russophobia, then, apparently, we have nothing to talk about with you. If you are nevertheless ready to discuss some options for coexistence, and, especially, cooperation, then we have something to discuss. We have never refused dialogue, and we do not reject it now. Decide, the choice is yours. Thank you.
Met in Istanbul today for just over 1 hour, enough time to exchange memorandums on their demands for a possible settlement to end this war. On Kiev's side, you got more of the same of what they've been saying for the last 3 years now, including no restrictions on Ukraine's military, no recognition of the regions that have voted to join Russia since 2014, and of course their continued demand of reparations from Russia. Whereas on Russia's side, they're still demanding neutrality for Ukraine, recognition of those 5 regions, and they're also taking it a step further, insisting that there have to be protections for Ukraine's Russian-speaking population, noting that Nazi-related organizations need to be outlawed. Oh, and Russia is calling for an end to foreign aid for Kiev. Now, the one thing that they did agree on was a plan for the exchange of another 1,000 prisoners of war, as well as on Russia's end, the delivery of around 6,000 bodies of dead Ukrainian soldiers. Now, Kiev claimed that they would also be delivering 6,000 Russian soldiers. It's not clear yet as to whether they actually have that many. I have not seen anything to confirm that claim. It seems like the spokesperson for Kiev was just kind of going along and saying, yeah, sure, we'll agree to that. So they did have an agreement that was made, but still very far from any kind of ceasefire. And this all comes as just one day ago, Kiev carried out an unprecedented drone attack across 5 Russian regions, and we are looking to see how Russia is going to respond. So where does this leave the ongoing conflict? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Andrei Martyanov, a veteran author and Russian military expert. Andrei, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
My pleasure, always.
Now, I want to get your take on the latest here, as we, of course, saw delegations from Russia and Ukraine met in Istanbul today, where they did exchange documents listing their demands for a possible ceasefire or even a possible end to the war. But I want to get into this attack that was carried out on Sunday first, because the timing of that is something that is very notable here, as Kiev, of course, carried out an unprecedented drone attack targeting nuclear bombers in military airfields in 5 Russian regions, stretching all the way to Russia's far east. Now, reports say that this attack took a year and a half to plan, that it required smuggling of these drones into Russian territory. So how do you view the attack? Is this about actually harming the Russian military's capabilities, or is this about essentially trying to embarrass Russia?
It's PR primarily. Not to say that out of those 5 planes which have been attacked, and I'm on record, and it's PR action primarily because it was planned by MI6, and we know how British plan things. They just kill themselves primarily. They're not good at planning anything. But they did, evidently, they did damage beyond the repair to Tu-95 MCs, which are strategic bombers, and damaged other 2 Tu-22 M3s. But evidently, those will be returned to service. They have been damaged, not destroyed. So, and yeah, when they go and say about $7 billion or 40, I mean, math is not strong forte for the generally Western media, and obviously British especially. So, but yeah, it was primarily PR. It was the desire to inflict some kind of damage. The problem is that it took away from the forefront the terrorist acts against the civilians, civilian trains. So much so that even Mr. Rubio had to express condolences to Mr. Lavrov yesterday when he spoke to him. And of course, somehow it doesn't matter anymore. But this is what actually NATO does. It's good, yeah, like, diversionary actions, terrorism, fighting civilians. And so, I mean, that's pretty much it. Once the high of this, hysteria, which was, of course, even my blog, I had all those trolls immediately materializing in large numbers, and into my video, under my video yesterday, I have a bunch of the, Ukrainians and their supporters saying, oh yeah, Russia is defeated. Sure, today we saw how it was defeated. Russia capitulated by reinstating its So, but yes, I mean, it's unpleasant. It's one-off. They carried out, definitely did destroy 2 of them, 295 MCs. but it's all of this amounted to 3.1% of Russian bomber force, which is active. Russians can pull out of the conservation another 170 bombers if it comes down to it. So, I mean, militarily, it's not significant, but it was primarily PR and, create this atmosphere and hysteria prior to meeting in Istanbul, which we know concluded a few hours ago, and it was less than an hour. They basically handed them paper and negotiated to the, which was happening prior years too. It is the 24 to 48 hours ceasefire on the sectors to remove primarily overall majority of the corpses of the armed forces of Ukraine, which they begin to rot. And it has been complained for 3 years now. Once the spring, summer comes, the stench in the gray zone is unbearable because you have, and so they kind of decided to give it again. It's not the first time that the corpses to be removed because it's a health hazard. Horrendous.
Yeah, and it was interesting to see, and I'm with you. I didn't expect too much to come from those talks. It seems like the agreement on the trading of prisoners of war is about all we're going to get. And on that note about this attack that was carried out by Kiev being a PR stunt, I mean, the media played right into it, right? Because initially Kiev claimed, oh, we got 40 Russian bombers, we destroyed them. That was every headline. And then once you start reading into the article, then you eventually get to the paragraph where they say this can't not be independently verified. When I start looking into it, I'm going, okay, the video there's not video evidence of that, right? They show them blowing up a couple of planes and that's about it. But also what was notable is you had a lot of these pro-NATO accounts acting as if Kiev had just rolled out some new kind of capability, like they're going to be able to recreate this attack over and over again. And it's like, this took 18 months to carry out. So where does that leave us when it comes to Kiev's focus on, like you were saying, they are focused on kind of these one-off attacks, this Kursk incursion, this sort of thing. None of it benefits them whatsoever, but that seems to be their goal, which ultimately makes things worse for them on the battlefield.
Well, yes, correct. Albeit, I have to say that it's not one-off. They tried and did attack one of the Tu-95s and one Tu-22 a couple of years ago at Engels Airfield. And now we know, which is actually have been suspected all along, that all those drones are flying not from Ukraine, they're flying from the inside Russian territory. So, and this is obviously, well, CBS today, report that United States comes out, oh, no, we didn't provide anything. Oh, yes, you did. So they did provide the actually intel on the movement of the Russian strategic bombers, because this is what United States actively does. It's ISR, but it will continue. Terrorism, and diversionary actions, that's what it is. And this is obviously brings up this question, which nobody in the West wants to touch, because Russians committed a horrendous strategic mistake in 2014, when they essentially granted passports to so many people from the new republic, which are now oblasts. I mean, and millions of Ukrainians went to Russia. They settled there, and with it, inevitably, they brought very many sleeper cells, which is, and again, people have to understand it's the tourism of the military science that guerrilla diversionary actions are capable only on the territory when a significant part of the population supports your activity. And this brings up this whole issue. That is why people now say, oh, they're Sheremetyevo, we know they filtrate them and all that. It should have been done, obviously, earlier, because now you haven't heard about this brotherly nation rhetoric for a long time now from even political top. The Ukrainians, as they exist today, they are not brotherly nation. This is I wrote about for years. They have coalesced, coagulated into the political nation. So it's very many wrong reasons why it happened, but you cannot actually, no matter how it is, they are others. They are not Russians, and they don't want to be Russians, at least, majority of them. So, and that's the reason why Russians are not rushing to, Western borders and occupying all over Ukraine. So, and that's precisely the reason for all of that. And FSB obviously has now its hands full. You cannot exclude further attacks on that. Sometimes repetition of the Crocus City, because London is it's a hotbed of the terrorist activity, planning and implementing it, and so is CIA, United States. But at least the United States has already stated they expressed, condolences. Europeans, for the most part, they're giddy. They love to see Russian civilians killed, so that's who they are.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really great point to keep in mind, because I know that some people look at this current situation and they're like, why didn't Russia go in, take out Zelensky on day one, overrun the entire country? And it's like, just because they could have done a version of that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they wanted to do, because all of these concerns in terms of running the country, dealing with things, dealing with all of these Ukrainians and others there who hate Russians, that would now be something that the Russian government would have to deal with directly, even in a way that they're not having to deal with it now. And now back to your point about the Western involvement in this latest attack and really this latest escalation that we're seeing overall, I thought it was interesting. President Trump has been awfully quiet. And as you noted there, you had these reports immediately that were saying, oh, the White House had no idea about
he had an idea. It's just, they're selling this. Obviously, he knew. Trump is, again, anybody who believes that Trump wants peace, I have a bridge to sell them. He wants the peace on American conditions, and he tries still to do the trick, which is impossible to do, as today's negotiation, so-called, less than an hour meeting in Istanbul proved. You cannot avoid being called the party to the conflict. United States is the force behind this essentially atrocity which happened, because they killed more than 1.5 million of the armed forces of Ukraine and about 100,000 of Russian servicemen. And they think that Russians are stupid, believing that they can be mediators. Trump, actually, it was on his administration, first one, when this whole thing went into the overdrive. And so, it's, what can I say? Trump can keep quiet whatever he wants. But people are not fools. And so, the United States knew it, and it took part, obviously. But the main brain behind all this are British, because they have the visceral hatred of Russia and Russians. So, and there is a combination of the factors which define their attitude, especially the fact that they are basically historical sole losers. They used to have empire, now it is like a little archipelago of with the no real economy practically, so. And so they're really pissed. And then, they are on the verge of their, evidently some people say that Starmer has to be again changed as a prime minister. I don't know. Nothing can save United Kingdom. It's on the way out as a nation, same way as France, for example, And so it will get much worse, and it's not going to get better, because United Kingdom will disintegrate eventually. It's inevitable. So will France, for example. Another, so people who are, fanatics, and, I'm talking about the political elites, albeit large portions of the population of Europe, they are on board with that, no matter what people say. Oh, yeah, we have the guy with the common sense. Oh, good. 1 over 100, so he goes out and posts the comment, hey, not all of us like this here. Yeah, I know, but majority is, So, and what can I say? It is what it is, and it's a long game, and the United States lost on so many positions, and today what we saw pretty much sums it up, really.
Yeah, and I also thought it was interesting, speaking of the UK, because Prime Minister Keir Starmer was speaking earlier, and he said that it's time for Britain to move to a war-fighting readiness. as he announced plans to invest billions of taxpayer dollars into nuclear warheads and attack submarines. Now, I know that Russia isn't exactly shaking in their boots over this, but I mean,
no, Russians do from Homeric laughter. I mean, it's when you Homerically laugh, you do shake in boots. You know, it's. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's PR. I mean, the guys are well. They are not even the part of whatever this G7 thing is. You know, United Kingdom simply doesn't have scientific and other capability to do anything like this. And well, they can try, no doubt about it. But I mean, really, and we're talking about the fact that, especially the problem with their submarine fleet, that LinkedIn and in newspapers ads to find commander for the nuclear-powered submarine fleet or Royal Navy. I mean, can you imagine a Russian Ministry of Defense saying, "We need admiral who will run the Russian submarine fleet," and it's placed in some kind of the tabloid, and you know, it's many people do not even understand the significance of it. It just tells you what I am on the record for. The actually military education in United Kingdom as such is non-existent. It's a joke, and so this is a result. They have the demoralized Navy, they screwing each other, you know, on the submarines, both men and women, whatever. So you look at this, it's just, they need to, you know, the pep talk, if you wish, for the, well, pretty demoralized British people, especially considering the economic difficulties now. So, and they will go for any lengths to sell them cornucopia of the BS and, you know, all kinds of idiotic ideas. But so that's what West political elites are. They can only do verbiage. They cannot deliver any concrete, you know, result. No, they can, actually. You have to admit they managed to destroy European economies with this green agenda and all that very effectively. I have to admit, this is unbelievable. Other than that, that's what they do.
Yeah, it's interesting, all of these countries that are so focused on their hatred of Russia and trying to destroy Russia. And it's like, well, look what's happening in your own backyard. They're not too concerned about that, or at least they don't claim to be. Now, when it comes to this overall trend that we're seeing in Ukraine and with Russia as well, we have seen in recent weeks drone attacks hitting record numbers. On Russia's side, they're hitting key military targets. On Kiev's side, it seems like they are just trying to get through Russia's air defenses, or rather to try to exhaust them. But what does that tell us about where the conflict stands, and how long can it keep going at this pace?
Well, I mean, it was clear last year already, the Russian troops essentially have been informed that 2025 remains the combat year primarily, not all of it, and then eventually it will go down, because it all comes down to the Russians are really good at math, especially general stuff. They count the mobilizational potential of Ukraine, and they know essentially what is happening. The models are there; they have been proven over the decades, if not century, essentially, of the essential attrition models. And so they know that now just the story, and it has been confirmed, it's recorded, it's all over. There was a guy from, not was, he's probably still is, from Armed Forces of Ukraine, Ukrainian guy. So he flies his last drone, and then he asks Russians on the radio, "Guys, please do not shoot it down. I'll just fly around and go back." Because once he runs out of the drone, do you know what happens next? He's thrown on the battlefield, and it's guaranteed death. So he asked the Russians not to shoot down this drone because it was the last one. So he flew it back. So I assume he can still say, yeah, "Oh, you see, I'm still kind of active as the drone operator," and things like that. That tells you everything you need to know. And this is why they talk about this 24 to 48 hour ceasefire at some sectors, because they need to remove those rotting corpses. It has been done before. And last year and the year before that, Russian soldiers were complaining that in the gray zone, it's impossible to be even in the trenches because the smell, the stench is horrible. And as you might understand, the decomposing bodies, they create a horrendous hazard. And this is exactly what is happening right now. And what can I say? People who deal with the mobilization issues of the enemy, they know how many left. They know how many plus minus, of course. Nobody says that they have all numbers. The idea is essentially, as I already stated, and I will repeat again for those who, and I understand it sounds horrible. Russian task here is to essentially eliminate the sperm bank of Ukraine in order for this nation essentially dissipate, and because the way it exists today, it cannot exist. It is we are looking at something which will be studied and which is in psychological and psychiatric terms is more profound and more vile, if you wish, than even Nazi Germany, because many people obviously there went on and they were lied to, but with Ukraine or whatever is left of it, we are dealing with a nation which essentially committed suicide just based on those delusions of grandeur, which have been, of course, installed there by all kinds of the, special services, intel services, and propagandists, and State Department, USA, and just among many other places and locations and organizations, if you wish. So this one will be studied, because we're looking at the mass hysteria on unprecedented level. It is equaling in many respects the almost those famous, Nazi gatherings in Nuremberg before the start of the World War II with Hitler. So this is what it all went. And that the tragedy of this situation is that if somebody thinks that, oh yeah, there are like brotherly people, they're not brotherly people. There are some people who have common sense, but even those people who are not outwardly hostile to Russians, they are profoundly settled on this whole idea of Ukrainstva, Ukraine as some kind of special state. And, and fact is, there will be very many books, I'm sure, written about it, certainly not very few in the West, because considering the academic level of the Western media today, it's rather pathetic. So, but yes, there will be. And the same as the proper studying of the special military operation in military terms.
Again, it's interesting to me too, exactly as you're laying it out there. I'm thinking, the US loves to work with extremists, right? They love to go for it. Doesn't matter what their ideology is, if they're violent right-wing neo-Nazis, if they're Islamic jihadists. The US goes, okay, those are our guys. They fight the proxy war. That way we can have, Lindsey Graham sitting back here in Washington and saying, oh, yeah, great, they're killing Russians and no American soldiers are dying. But when it puts the US in this position where right now they're fighting this ongoing proxy war against Russia, they know that they're not going to win it, but they also know that they are going to happily sacrifice Ukraine for this attempt at hurting Russia. What does that tell us about kind of the state of US foreign policy and what should be a wake-up call to the rest of the world here?
Well, United States militarily is a paper tiger. Actually, it has been, when you look attentively at the Korea, then Vietnam, then Iraq, and I'm not talking about this, beating the excrement from the utterly incompetent army of Saddam and semi-literate essentially. And so then we have Afghanistan and things like this, and on and on and on. And yet they still have audacity to come and say that, oh, we're so good, just now they have been humiliated, especially what is the main point of was always of American triumphalism. That's, oh, look at our technology. It was humiliated, simple as that. It's not good. All those weapon systems, they are not designed for anything really, except to being sold. So they still can hurt, make no mistake. And so, yeah, they had this best proxy, the best proxy America ever had. And this best proxy was, of course, armed forces of Ukraine, which have been trained, transitioned to the NATO table of organization equipment, essentially, so they've been trained to so-called NATO standards. And now they see what happened to all that, and it's even the last laughable as it is, because RAND is the fraudulent organization, as most of them are. And so even they said, oh yeah, we need to improve the analysis on the pre-war analysis. Really, you can. American system of the military education is a joke too, you know. So I know who those people are who teach, you know, let's say like strategy, you know, like Sarah Payne, you know, in the Naval War College. She has no clue. I mean, those people literally have no clue. They have no clue about Russia. They don't have clue about real warfare, because everything what United States knows about war was written and installed, essentially, and ingrained by them, by the Wehrmacht and Nazi generals. From you know, von Manstein to Hauser to all those people, they were responsible, working, including for the history department of the U.S. Army. As an official capacity, they wrote them history of the World War II, in which they were so great, you know. But somehow we lost, you know. But no, we were amazing, you know. So yeah, they obviously, and the United States Army never operated on the in reality. They thought that, oh yeah, we landed in Normandy and we won the war. Well, yeah, forget about that. Most of the 85% of creme de la creme of Wehrmacht and other Axis armies, Hungary, Italy, you know, so, and you go on and on. Romania, they have been all basically killed on the Eastern Front. So, but no, they believed that. They believed that, you know, those fairy tales, and for some reason, and especially when you look attentively at British and, you know, they have no clue about real history. They teach them some operations which are based on the garbage information. They do not understand, actually. No, I mean it. You literally can take any American general. He will know how to run anything. They will know how to run day-to-day, you know, not operation, but the life cycle, so to speak, of the formation. They are not taught properly how to fight real war. They never were. And it's questioned like, oh yeah, we knew that we can do it. No, they failed in Korea. It was to the greatest credit and strategic vision of actually Eisenhower, Dwight D. Eisenhower, who at that time was president, to stop this, you know, basically bloodletting. And essentially, United States got used to hide behind the backs of their proxies. And they had this best proxy ever. And they thought that they will bloody Russian nose. Russians will go. They thought, okay, they will do these big air offensives. They will get into the full Ukraine, occupy it, and that will drain the resources. Putin's regime will. So, you know how it goes. The fact that you say that you don't understand, a basic American officer has no idea about real operations, because they do not understand what correlation of forces and means is. They don't teach those things. They teach things that, oh yeah, we have the best aviation. When was the last time United States fought against the real serious air defense? I can tell you, in Vietnam, and it ended up really badly, you know. So, but no, they think that because you fly into their zone, which has essentially no air defense, you fight their troops, which are, well, sandal wearing AK-74, the best you can find there is T-55 tank from 1952, you know. So it's like, sure, why not? And there you go. That's what they taught themselves. All those lessons are primarily academically and militarily a fraud. There are some people who understand the operations, some people who understand what is happening. They say they raise voices, but they are never in any kind of the position on influence in any, even in Pentagon. And I look at those people who come out of it, they won't be able to hold any professional discussion on the issue of the real combined arms operations, let alone operations of this scale. At least one guy admitted it, Mr. Cavoli, who is still Supreme Commander of the NATO forces in Europe. He did admit it. But then again, did you see his background? He actually has a degree in biology.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he went through the ROTC. I mean, I don't know how to describe it. It's the discrepancy, the levels of the military thinking are they simply incompatible. And that is why you have people like Kellogg or General Keane or Petraeus, they're clowns, essentially. They won't understand the first thing. Well, maybe they do. They just do not have enough, how to say it, honor and courage to come to the, mirror and say, good Lord, what did I do to myself? Because basically, apart from the fact that, it's a war crime of the unimaginable scale. And essentially, most of the Western media, the journalists who represent this Western media, who were pushing this Ukrainian propaganda, they are war criminals. There is definitely very little difference between Die Deutsche Wochenschau from 1944, when they and New York Times or anybody from CNN or from the press corps. Those people are morons, essentially. And as a result, this whole echo chamber imploded on itself, and now they scratch their head and they try to extricate United States from the conundrum. And United States is not intermediary. It is the party to the conflict. It is co-belligerent of Ukraine, and nothing could be changed. And Russians today, again, without following any kind of the instructions and suggestions from Trump administration, State Department, like they said 2 days ago, oh, we have benchmarks. Who cares about your benchmarks? Here's your memorandum. It's either my way or highway. This is simple as that. It was simple like this for 3 years now.
Yeah, and it's crazy to me watching exactly as you're pointing it out there. But on the US side, it's like we've got Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth going, we are prepared to win a war against China. And I'm like, you couldn't even beat the Houthis in Yemen. Like, no, you're not. And you're certainly not beating Russia. In fact, you're giving Russia multiple years of direct combat experience that the US is not getting on its end just by sending support to Ukraine. And when you look at these memorandums that are presented, what we've seen reported on them so far, it's like Zelensky's side is still demanding reparations from Russia. That's where they're at, right? They have no grip on reality. Whereas on Russia's side, they're actually putting forth demands that the West, if they were smart, they would consider, right? They're calling for the legal recognition of the 5 regions that voted to join Russia since 2014, protections for Ukraine's Russian-speaking population, and neutrality for Ukraine, and outlying of Nazi-related organizations. And I know that Russia's throwing a couple of those in there just to make it known, hey, we did not forget about our initial demand, right? The initial reason we got into all of this. But when it comes to Russia's response, as you were noting earlier, yes, they are playing the long game here, right? They know that this is going to be a very long process. But when we see attacks carried out like the one that we saw on Sunday, does there come a point where we see, I don't know if it's a harsher response from Russia, or is this just about grinding down Kiev's military to the point when it collapses? Yes, we know it's going to be a long battle, but that is the overall goal, and that's what Russia is going to continue pursuing.
Yeah, what you said last. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, make no mistake, those acts will continue. They happened before, just this one is slightly more scaled up, but it's, they will continue. You have now millions of Ukrainians, by far not all of them are bad people, make no mistake. I'm not saying that, but as I already stated, the stream influx of Ukrainian so-called refugees since 2014, with them they brought many sleeper cells. So add here the so-called, there is some Russian so-called opposition which is gladly working, all kinds of the fringe groups. So, and you can use them, and again, people forget Crocus City, the atrocity of Crocus City terrorist act, which was blatant execution of the peaceful people, which was carried out by the so-called ISIS. Well, it wasn't ISIS. The London's ears are just protruding from there. These people, again, do not forget, average British journal, for example, or American journal from establishment media, they would love, they are giddy from seeing Russians killed. The more Russian children, women, men killed, the better. That's what I'm saying. This is the level to which combined West basically descended, and this is what is essentially killing it. And this is already, actually, it's a fait accompli. The West hegemony is essentially over. Practically, even Rubio says it, it's unbelievable. When you have Rubio, the Secretary of State saying this, it's like, oh, okay. But the point is that some people still want to fight, considering that Washington, D.C. is stuffed with people who do not know what war is. Not a single American serviceman knows what war is, because none of them ever lost their family to war. They never saw their wives raped. They never saw their children killed. They never saw their property burned. In this respect, U.S. military has no idea about real war. It is essentially a police force to whip up, those, tribes such as, Iraqis on Afghanistan, just killing primarily civilians. So that's what they're good at. I mean, those, you saw yourself the technology. It's, at first it was holy javelins, sucked 20% of the combat effectiveness in the real combat. Oh, 777, aluminum-based bores run out of their alignment after 100, shots. It's just like, really? You want to fight with that? And then you look at the tanks, you look at the Abrams, Patriot PAC-3. I mean, Russians are laughing at it. It's I repeat it constantly. Deputy Commander of Russian Aerospace Forces, Lieutenant General Semyonov, stated, and I quote, it was all over the news, said, Patriot PAC-3, it cannot defend itself, let alone defend anything else. So, and you look at this, and all those TOE, Table of Organization Equipment, all those tactical plans, all those operational manuals, it's all garbage. They have to throw it, because any American technology, combat technology, let alone, I'm not talking about combat control, battle management, because the United States doesn't know how to do it properly. It's outranged, outshot, out everything. So when you look offensively, even on the long-range fires, which are in the foundation of American, advantage over, again, as I already stated, the tribes which barely out of the Stone Age, yeah, sure. But even Houthis showed, But the point is, the longest thing U.S. Army has at its disposal, or rather U.S. Air Force's JASSM. It's a 900-kilometer slow cruise missile. It's still dangerous, make no mistake. You can, when you look at the Russian arsenal, first, it's like you have the variety of things. All of them outrange this thing. And most of them are either supersonic or hypersonic. And there's no defense against it. They cannot do anything about it. There is no technology. And no matter what they will be trying to do, they will always come short, because I'm on record, and this has been proven empirically. United States lost the arms race by about precisely 2014. It just that hasn't been, visible. By 2018, it was all over. Now we see it all along. And so essentially what many people cannot still understand, United States simply ran out of supplies to provide Ukraine with, unless they want to go completely and give up whatever they have on the current, stores for the U.S. Army. And but yeah, sure, Russians will gladly oblige.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling sometimes to watch it and to realize, okay, the U.S. is picking this fight, and it is not remotely prepared for this fight that it's trying not to get itself directly into, but exactly as you noted there, we would not have this conflict without the U.S. and without everything it has done to get us to this point. And the U.S. is going to be paying the price of the conflict it continues to pick. And
it's already paying the price. And do not forget one thing. Many people still do not remember what happened. In 1971, famous Nixon's, jumping off the golden standard. Many people don't understand why it happened. United States simply couldn't finance the war in Vietnam. And let me put it this way, economically, United States of circa 1970, 1971, when adjusted for the time, it would look like an industrial giant compared to today's United States. and yet they still had to get off the golden standard in order for them to have the ability to make emissions and to finance the war in Vietnam. And war in Vietnam, frankly speaking, is not even the scale, or they still managed to kill 3 million civilians, but it is not even the scale of what is happening on the front lines right now in special military operation. And that just shows you how unprepared they were.
Yeah, and I love how the US is like, oh, we've got the UK, we've got France, we've got Germany. It's like, it is not going to end well for the West. At least it does not seem to be that way. But I always appreciate you taking the time to join me to break down and to explain all of the latest here on
A new trade alliance between three of the most important regions in the world has just formed, and it has the potential to change everything we know about the future of our global economy. In Kuala Lumpur, leaders from over 20 nations gathered for the first ever trilateral summit between ASEAN, China, and the Gulf Cooperation Council. And if you thought BRICS was a big deal, wait until you hear these numbers. The new alliance represents a combined GDP of nearly $25 trillion and a population of over 2 billion people. Most importantly, this new alliance represents 55% of world GDP growth, giving it substantial leverage in the future of our world economy. ASEAN, a powerful bloc of 10 Southeast Asian nations, already has a trade relationship with China that is 54% larger than US-China trade. And most importantly, it is growing at over 7% this year. Yet despite all of these facts, there was not a single mention of this event on the front pages of CNN, the BBC, or the New York Times. Why? Because this summit could mark the beginning of a global power shift, one where the West no longer calls the shots and China begins building a new world order with the global South. So in today's video, we're going to be breaking down exactly what happened at the ASEAN-China GCC summit and why it may go down as one of the most important geopolitical events of this decade. Let's dive in. Everyone, let's face it, the world is going through a period of massive uncertainty, and at the center of it all is the United States, driven by the aggressive policies of President Trump, who seems to be attacking every country on earth under the banner of making America great again. So far, we've seen plenty of disruption, but very few concrete wins for Trump in his global tariff war. Take a look at this graph. It's been 47 days since Trump launched his Liberation Day tariffs, and the number of legally binding trade agreements signed by Trump remains at zero. Trump isn't making America great again. Instead, he is uniting other regions of the world. And this new trilateral alliance between ASEAN, China, and the Gulf states will cover everything from free trade agreements and de-dollarization to the expansion of China's Belt and Road Initiative. No surprise here, but China is at the center of this new trade alliance, and China's premier, Li Qiang, sent a direct message to Washington. It's time to move beyond the Western-dominated trade system and build one that works for the global South. And trust me, this isn't just talk. The summit concluded with all of the nations standing together in support and issuing a joint statement agreeing to 5 new pillars of cooperation. Number 1, stronger trade ties. This new alliance will bolster economic integration through free trade deals, resilient supply chains, and digital economic growth. Number 2, infrastructure and connectivity. The regions will expand Belt and Road projects, maritime trade routes, and sustainable transportation across regions. Number 3, energy cooperation. They will collaborate on clean energy and nuclear tech and support climate change actions to support a just energy transition. Number 4, tech and innovation. They will build partnerships in AI, fintech, smart cities, and boost digital skills to future-proof their economies. And number 5, cultural exchange. They will promote tourism, education, and people-to-people ties through student exchanges and cultural initiatives. This is a stark contrast to Donald Trump's plan for America, where he is literally revoking the visas of international students as I make this video. But what's forming on the other side of the planet isn't just a partnership. It's the blueprint for a new global trade architecture built by and for the global South. But let's talk about the real catalyst behind this new alliance. And that, of course, is Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs. When Trump launched his so-called Liberation Day tariffs, he wasn't just targeting China. He also hit 6 of the 10 ASEAN nations, including key U.S. trade partners like Vietnam, Malaysia, and Thailand. Trump wants Americans to believe that he's protecting U.S. jobs. But let's be real. These jobs aren't coming back to the US. Instead, the only real result has been a diplomatic and economic backlash that's pushing countries closer to China. Far from isolating Beijing, these tariffs are accelerating exactly what Washington fears most: the rise of an alternative global economy. In response, ASEAN leaders have doubled down on regional integration, releasing a bold 5-year strategy to position themselves as the world's 4th largest economy by 2045. And with China as their largest trading partner and the GCC providing investment and energy security, that goal is starting to look very realistic. The GCC, made up of the oil-rich nations of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman, has traditionally been aligned with the United States. But that's changing fast. These nations are now diversifying their partnerships and plan to increase bilateral trade with ASEAN from $130 billion in 2023 to $180 billion by 2032. Their investments are targeting critical sectors like artificial intelligence, green technology, digital finance, and infrastructure, the very industries where China is already leading the world. So while America is busy building tariff walls, Asia and the Middle East are building bridges and laying the foundation for the new multipolar world that we now live in. Now, one of the most unexpected and powerful moments of the summit came from Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim majority nation and longtime U.S. military ally. Indonesia's newly elected president, Prabowo Subianto, delivered a speech that would have been unthinkable just a decade ago. Standing shoulder to shoulder with China's premier, Li Qiang, he praised China's unwavering opposition to imperialism, colonialism, and apartheid, and he didn't stop there. Prabowo also applauded China's support for Palestine, calling it a point of pride for all of us. And that line sent a clear message, not just to the Muslim world, but also to Washington. The US can no longer rely on religion or culture to divide China from the rest of the global South. Western media has long pushed the Xinjiang narrative as a wedge between China and Muslim nations. But what we're seeing from this trilateral summit is the exact opposite. From Indonesia to the Gulf, China is increasingly viewed as a moral counterweight to Western hypocrisy and a stable country that defends sovereignty, challenges imperialism, and most importantly, refuses to bow down to US pressure. But here's where things get very interesting. For years, critics in the West have pointed to the South China Sea as proof of China's aggression. But what's actually happening on the ground tells a very different story. In his speech, the Indonesian president called China a decisive partner in helping finalize the long-delayed Code of Conduct, a framework designed to reduce tensions and prevent conflict in the region. He emphasized that Indonesia and China share responsibility to ensure peace and prosperity across Asia. And once again, aside from the Philippines, most Southeast Asian nations no longer see China as the problem. In fact, they see China as the solution. It's a reality that you'll never hear in Western media. And that's really the point here. Our world is changing fast, and most people aren't being told the full story. While the US is caught up in tariffs, TikTok bans, and political chaos, new alliances are quietly reshaping the global order. BRICS and the ASEAN-China GCC alliance and the rise of our new multipolar world are all showing us that power is shifting. The US dollar is being challenged, and new trade routes are forming. And most importantly, the future will not look like the past. And when you zoom out and look at what all of this means, not just geopolitically, but economically, there's one simple truth. We are entering an era of instability. And that's why personally, I made it a priority to protect my investments. And in uncertain times, I don't chase hype. I look for stability. And that's why I've been a huge believer in gold, because no matter what chaos hits the headlines, gold has always held its value. Now, gold has been on an absolute tear lately, rising over 35% in the past 12 months alone. And central banks around the world are buying it like never before, with even the Polish central bank buying 90 tons of gold last year alone. And yet, despite all this momentum, many junior gold stocks, the early stage companies sitting on potentially massive deposits, have barely moved. And this disconnect is where the real opportunity in the market lies. Now, today's video sponsor is AxeCap Ventures, trading on the Canadian Securities Exchange
In the heart of Asia, a silent revolution just rolled across 8,400 kilometers of steel track. Not with tanks, not with treaties, but with a freight train. From the icy industrial plains of Inner Mongolia to the gates of Tehran, China has made its move. A move that could redraw trade routes, bypass global powers, and rewrite the rules of geopolitics. This isn't just cargo. This is strategy. This is defiance. This is the new Silk Road. In a quiet but powerful move that may reshape the balance of power across the Eurasian landmass, the first ever freight train from China arrived in Iran, signaling a major milestone in Beijing's Belt and Road ambitions. The train, which departed Baotou in Inner Mongolia, travelled over 8,400 kilometers to reach Tehran, taking just 16 days to complete the journey. This isn't just a logistical achievement, it's a geopolitical message. The arrival of the freight train marks the opening of a new economic corridor, potentially bypassing Western-controlled trade routes and giving Iran a crucial role in China's expanding global supply chain. This rail line is part of China's vast Belt and Road Initiative, a $1 trillion infrastructure project aimed at connecting China to Europe, the Middle East, and Africa via overland and maritime trade routes. With the US tightening sanctions and Western influence over key maritime choke points like the Suez Canal and the Strait of Hormuz, China is aggressively expanding continental logistics networks, and Iran is emerging as a vital link. According to Iranian officials, this new rail connection reduces shipping time by more than 20 days compared to maritime routes. A source in the Islamic Republic of Iran Railways hailed the arrival as a strategic success for both countries. This train is not just about cargo, it's about connectivity, sovereignty, and economic independence. The train carried a wide range of goods, electronics, auto parts, textiles, and machinery, and is expected to trigger a regular freight schedule, possibly turning Iran into a key logistics hub in China-Europe overland trade. For Tehran, this development could not come at a more critical moment. Under severe US sanctions, Iran has struggled to keep its economy afloat and its trade corridors open. By deepening ties with China, it gains not only access to goods and capital, but also geostrategic breathing space. China and Iran signed a 25-year strategic cooperation agreement in 2021, involving economic, military, and infrastructural investment worth up to $400 billion. While details of the deal remain opaque, this train symbolizes a concrete outcome of that pact and a step towards sanctions-proof trade architecture. In return, China secures access to Middle Eastern markets, critical resources, and a dependable overland route that avoids instability in the South China Sea and Indian Ocean. Chinese diplomat Wang Wenbin described the initiative as a win-win for peace, development, and cooperation. The train to Iran is a train to the future. The implications of this rail link extend far beyond cargo. By physically connecting Inner Mongolia to Tehran, China is signaling a shift away from maritime dependency, especially vulnerable sea lanes dominated by the US Navy, and towards secure land-based infrastructure stretching from Beijing to Brussels. For Iran, the move is equally symbolic. It places the country firmly within a multipolar trade network, reducing its reliance on Western-dominated systems like SWIFT, international banks, or traditional shipping routes. And for the broader region, it poses a direct challenge to US influence, particularly in Central Asia and the Middle East. Even Russia, currently isolated by Western sanctions over the Ukraine war, has quietly supported China's overland corridors. If the Iran route proves successful, a full east-to-west land bridge may soon become a reality, bypassing Europe's naval strongholds and economic gatekeepers. But officials in both China and Iran say this is just the beginning. Iran plans to expand its rail network, connecting Tehran to Bandar Abbas, Chabahar Port, and even further west toward Turkey and Europe. China, meanwhile, is already discussing additional rail routes through Central Asia, possibly linking Pakistan's Gwadar port, Afghanistan's rail system, and even Iraq into a broader logistics web. In essence, we are witnessing the revival of the ancient Silk Road, but turbocharged with 21st century geopolitics and technology. For Tehran, this could mean a pathway to economic survival and influence. For Beijing, it's another victory in its quiet conquest of global infrastructure.
We have a responsibility to act.
We will continue
of horror, I uploaded a video where people noticed there was something very unusual going on in the skies, that the sun looked very strange. Now, naturally, there were multiple people on different social media platforms talking about this very unusual looking sun, like on TikTok, YouTube, Twitter. But the pushback happens to be that there were multiple factors contributing as to why the sun looks the way it does. One of them being the Canadian wildfires, and the other being the Saharan dust, among other things. Even though this red sphere was also seen in China a month ago prior to all of these events, but anyway, the explanation is fine. It's fine. I'm not going to argue with the schematics, the hydromatics, or all the other matics. But this was until people noticed that the red sphere was actually the third object in the sky and perhaps not the sun.
No, that's not the moon. The moon is above us. I don't see. That's there. That's there. And that's not the sun. That can't be the sun because the sunset is over there.
Hey, that's a planet.
The sunset is over there.
Mommy, that's a planet.
And the moon is up here.
Yeah. So that must be a planet.
The moon is above us. I don't see. That's there. That's there.
So we have the red sphere, and then to the west, of course, we have the setting sun. So this is not a sundog. And then we have the moon. And then I saw another video taken around the same time by another individual where it shows the red sphere actually coming out of the sun or from behind the sun. Now, one might think this is some kind of reflection or a glare issue, but after this video, I'm going to go ahead and show why it's not. This video comes from Harmony on TikTok. And isn't it just so interesting how that happens to look like the MasterCard logo? Really makes you wonder where these companies, these organizations, get the idea behind these designs. But anyway, going back to the second object, either coming out of the sun or coming from behind the sun, multiple people were capturing video footage of the second object. And what happens to be interesting is that this object has its own glare. It has its own lens reflection.
Guys, when you stop to appreciate the good. Whoa! That isn't even the reflection of the window, guys, because I've got the window open. What is that next to the sun? I was just saying, when we stop to appreciate the small things in life, i.e. the gorgeous sunsets, and now I've just spotted, what is that? Oh my God, guys, what is that? Please put your camera at the sun right now and tell me that you're seeing what I see. What the hell? The fuck is that? No, it can't be. Oh my God, guys, what is that? Open your cameras right now, zoom in to the sun, and tell me what that thing is next to it.
Then I saw this interesting video from Neta Knight on TikTok, who took frame by frame video footage of this second object coming from behind the sun. But when it comes to this video, this individual here left a comment that I really do like a lot. He goes on to say, it's a mirror, wake up. It's a massive mirror or some kind of electronic mirror, but it's intensifying the heat twofold. And also, that's how they are using weapon attacks. Then he goes on to say, reflection, just like everything is a reference. I believe he means reflection. Moon had Earth's reflection. Water had any reflection. Look at the shadows. It looks like a huge flashlight. If you bounce high intensity yellow light off a mirror, it comes back as white light and very hot. Magnifying glass and the original sun is an excellent example. This is a comment that really stands out to me because for those that have been subscribed to this channel for quite some time now, you will know that anytime I've made a video about the sun, I would say that the sun looks like a white LED light bulb and it's very intense. But his comment here is not that far off because... But does anybody remember these news articles that came out after the April 8th solar eclipse? I don't think many people talk about these articles enough, like the one I'm reading from Forbes here, which was published back on December 3rd, 2024. Europe's fake total solar eclipses will last 6 hours. What to know? The article goes on to say, how long did totality last for you during April 8th's total solar eclipse in North America? A minute, maybe two. Although it is possible for a total solar eclipse to bring darkness in the day, and a chance to see the sun's majestic corona with the naked eye for up to 7 minutes and 31 seconds, most last just a couple of minutes. And they go on to say how it's a shame and they should last longer. Well, this is where things get more interesting because the article goes on to say time in totality will not be a problem for WW3, a tech demo mission by the European Space Agency with Belgium and Spain as the main contributors that will see satellites together try to create totality for up to 6 hours, about 50 times a day. Fuel limitations will mean 1,000 hours of totality during the 2-year mission. This is an example diagram they give us in this article of what this object will do. And to me, it looks like this object is reflecting the sunlight like a magnifying glass. Could this object also intensify the sun's light, dim the sun's light, or even mock the sun altogether? Now, when it comes to them putting this object or objects up in the sky, because I don't believe their version or narrative of space because they're always lying, they say they're doing this because they want to study the sun and see how the sun works. Yeah, and I'm sure that CERN is just smashing particles together to study the Big Bang. Who knows what these objects are truly doing when it comes to the sun, but I will never believe their version or narrative of things. But this is not something that's been just going on very recently as of 2024. This has been going on for quite some time where they're shooting objects in the sky to either reflect, mirror, intensify, or even dim the sunlight. I mean, look at this. Look at the other image that they give us. Does this not look like an object that could produce a second image of the sun or intensify the sunlight? They are once again showing us what the object looks like, and to me, it still looks like an object that could produce an image of a second sun and manipulate the sunlight in some sort of way. And around the same time, didn't we get that second moon, that asteroid they said was Earth's second moon, that happened on September 29th? And who knows what that object really was that they said was exactly 33 feet in length. This could have been something they also shot up that works hand in hand with these two satellites. The article continues to say the pair of satellites will fly together in a fixed configuration as if they were a single sizable rigid structure in space. Personally, again, I believe they're placing these things up in the skies. That's why they're spraying the skies like crazy, even with something called Satan, so we don't see half of the things that they are doing or half of these things in action. But the article continues to say, proving out formation flying and rendezvous tech, both spacecraft will have to maintain accurate positioning to just a few millimeters using GPS, star trackers, and radio links to get roughly aligned. A visual-based sensor that uses camera and LED lights will be used to get precisely aligned. So again, this just sounds like one giant technologically advanced mirror that also may have other purposes. They have had these objects up there for quite some time, for years, perhaps decades, and they're just replacing old tech with the new. And these articles, while they are truth in plain sight, still hold a lot of deception. So that comment that individual left was spot on accurate, and perhaps one of the better theories when it comes to this second object, and how the sun has been looking very bizarre. Again, when I go back to saying a white LED light bulb, and it's just very intense. And I always go back to the 2024 Economist magazine cover, a magazine cover I've spoken about quite often on this channel because it looks like you can see what appears to be two eclipses. You can see what looks like to be a more natural one, and then the one at the bottom, which I believe is the more artificial one. And they still come together to create a giant sphere. Just like they said in that article on Forbes that those two objects would do, they would come together and align. But that is just my theory. That is just my take. What are other people saying about this? This next video comes from Moon Henry on TikTok.
What's up right now? And I mean, really, what is up? We'll get to this in a minute because it's been seen all over the US and the world the last few days. But look at this image right here. You can see all the things, all the different things impeding our ability to see the sky. I showed you yesterday that all we saw was haze around everywhere. Couldn't see the sky at all. What you just saw wasn't the sun. We'll get to it. What's the probability that this time of this great geomagnetic storm that has us all feeling really bad, what's the odds that we have Saharan dust coming in? We have the Canadian wildfire just pushing all this supposed smoke in the sky. And obviously we have the hurricane and all the other stuff. And I want you to take a special mention right here when I show you where the greatest tornado risks are. And I match it up with this Aurora map. I don't know. Something seems like it's a little bit fishy right here. Now, the video you see behind me is not relevant whatsoever. I just put it up there for your entertainment, for your attention while I speak for a second. It's weird because I've been trying to show you guys something the last few days and no one's seeming to get it. Now, this setting right here was in Georgia. I showed you the one at the beginning of the video. We also have this one up here in UK. So tell me, what is this? This is not the sun because the sun was setting at the same time they took the video in the other video. So what is this? And funny enough, not related, people were actually seeing this the day before. Nah, it's not a lens flare. It's another object that creates its own lens flare. Some people out there will just unalive on a hill trying to make sense of things we can't make sense of. This was another image that was caught the day before. So yeah, all this stuff is very odd. Why can we not see the sky, or parts of the sky are covered with smoke and sand and you name it, while this crazy geomagnetic storm goes off and we have these sightings of this really weird red thing just hanging out in the sky? Anyways, if you get a camera, be ready to take some awesome pictures.
This next video comes from the Damn It Man.
I absolutely hate videos like this, but I am going for my morning freaking walk and I have got to be tripping here, dog. I got to be tripping. Every morning I go for a walk, and every morning the sun glare is in the same freaking spot. Blinds me right from that direction. So tell me why the sun is over here. Why the hell is the sun over here when it should be over here? What? Oh well. Oh well, right? So I kind of thought I might have been mistaken, but I'm not mistaken here. I'm going to have to move this hydrangea because it doesn't get full sun. And if that's because the sun rises over there, gives me morning sunlight, and then kind of goes, ends right there, exactly where it did yesterday. This dude is coming up over here and looking very freaking weird. It's coming up right there, which would give me sun. What the hell? I guess I don't have to move my hydrangea. Damn it, man.
What is very interesting about his video is that a lot of people, including myself, have been seeing the moon rising or setting at the wrong side, seeing the sun rising and setting on the wrong side. In some way, shape, or form, there's definitely some kind of manipulation taking place here. This next video comes from Source Force Warrior, who has been recording this for the past couple days.
There it is. What's crazy as fuck is you can see it through the leaves. That's crazy. It's right there. It's a red dwarf, so we really got a hell of a thermal signature, man.
A good friend of mine was recently in Virginia Beach and took this photo. She was sitting on the beach herself, saw this with her own two eyes. And I want everybody's honest opinion about what we think this could possibly be. And before anybody says that it's the moon does not shine like the sun. So what actually could this be? Here's a video. It makes no sense. I have seen some of these pictures, make it to like local news stations and they discuss it on air, but there's never an answer. There's never an explanation. And I don't know if we have an explanation. In Luke 21, I think it says that there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars, but that's in reference to the second coming, more towards the end of the tribulation. Could they be starting now? I think it's possible, or could this be something which man created? Because I know there have been discussions from higher ups that discuss the possible attempt to block out the sun for climate reasons. So could that be this? I don't know. I have no clear answer. I don't know. So I want everybody's honest opinion, what y'all think this actually could be.
That video is from Ashley Hayes 2.0. And again, you can see the two lens flares. You can even see the matching reflection within the waters.
Have scientists in the UK gone mad? The UK just approved a $66 million project to undo nature, to undo Mother Nature. What is it? Dimming the sun. You heard me, dimming the sun. What did the sun do wrong? What did it do? Do you know we get vitamin D from the sun? We get nutrients from the sun. Just being exposed to the midday sun that's above your head in the afternoons can give you your daily dose of vitamin D. So the question remains, how does the UK plan on dimming the sun. Let me show you.
Experiments
Watch.
to dim sunlight to
Look
fight
at this.
global warming will be given the green light by the government within weeks.
Here's a diagram of exactly how they plan on dimming the sun. They're going to have high-flying planes emitting small sulfite particles into the atmosphere to block some of the sun's energy. Part 2 of it, crops could benefit from less heat stress, but dimmer sunlight may reduce yields. And if you read part 3, dimmer skies could alter weather patterns, causing famine. Read it. This makes no sense whatsoever. They're also planning on spraying seawater into the clouds. That's called marine cloud brightening. There's also plans to deploy reflective materials over ice and land.
That video comes from the Joe D69, and with them spraying all these chemicals and so forth in the skies, it's multi-purposed. They are destroying the crops. They are going to induce hunger, destroying very useful insects like bees and so forth. It's all about terraforming the planet for something.
Coffee. Follow me.